Hi guys. Tonight we settle into a world where the air bites sharper than anything your heated bedroom could ever imagine. Snow stretches endless and white, and you step into a Native American winter camp at dawn, where your breath leaves small clouds that drift like ghosts above the frosted ground. The people here have no electric blankets, no radiators humming in the corner, no thermostats at the flick of a finger. It is just them, the land, and whatever ingenuity centuries of survival have carved into their traditions. You probably won't survive this night if you were suddenly dropped here in your pajamas, so take comfort in the fact that we're only visiting through imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time down in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, and let's step closer. You trudge through freshly fallen snow that squeaks beneath your moccasins, the kind of dry, crystalline flakes that only gather when the temperature plunges well below freezing. The sky above is tinged with soft lavender, the promise of a reluctant sun still hidden below the horizon. Around you rise the faint silhouettes of dwellings. Some are round, mounded earth lodges with smoke feathering out of their tops. Others are sharp, triangular teepees rising like sentinels against the pale glow. Your eyelashes frost, and every exhale makes you acutely aware of how thin the veil is between your body's heat and the cold that wants to claim it. The camp hums with muted life. Children, their noses red, peek out from under blankets of rabbit fur. A dog shakes itself free of snow beside a fire pit, sending tiny white crystals flying into the air. You catch the faint smell of wood smoke mixed with animal hides, a scent that is both comfort and necessity here. The knowledge that without this smoke, this warmth, these furs, the people could not endure even one night, settles deep in your mind. A mainstream fact reminds you that many tribes of the plains and the northern woodlands shifted their dwellings seasonally. In the summer, lightweight structures suited the heat and mobility of hunting. In the winter, sturdier, heat-retaining lodges became essential, sometimes dug partially into the earth to harness the insulation of soil. This was not a careless choice. It was a calculated dance with climate. They knew the earth's warmth better than most modern engineers know insulation ratings. You step closer to one of the lodges. Its entrance is small, almost mean-looking, forcing you to crouch low as you imagine crawling inside. But that tiny entry keeps out icy drafts. Inside, the air would hit you with a blast of smoky heat, a sudden contrast that makes your chilled skin sting before it soothes. And yet, historians still argue whether the smoke that filled these lodges was more help or hazard. Some claim the constant inhalation caused long-term damage to lungs, while others insist it toughened bodies against winter colds. You picture the interior. Smoke swirling, sparks glowing, the air heavy but warmer, life saving in every sense. Quirky details emerge too. Some accounts describe people plugging gaps in the walls with moss or even frozen mud, an odd trick that worked better than it sounds. Snow, after all, can insulate if you know how to use it. Imagine pressing handfuls of icy powder against a wall, and instead of it melting, it becomes part of the structure, sealing out bitter winds. You'd never think of snow as a friend in survival, yet here, it quietly lends its help. The frost makes you look up. A crow flies overhead, black wings slicing through pastel dawn. Its call is harsh, but to the people here, it is a familiar companion. Life in winter is not silent, even if the snow muffles footsteps and voices. There is always the sound of crackling firewood, the breath of animals, the whistle of wind around huts, and the occasional cry of a bird scouting for scraps. These noises root you in the present, reminding you that despite the hardships, this camp is alive. As you walk further into the camp, you catch sight of hunters returning from an early check of traps. They carry nothing yet, but their faces are calm. They know that survival is not measured in hours, but in patience stretched across months. The fur-lined hoods around their heads are rimmed with frost, their movements slow but deliberate. You imagine the sensation of pulling such a hood tighter, the sharp scent of animal hide near your nose, the rough texture brushing your skin. For a moment, you wonder, could you truly sleep in such a place, where every breath feels like a borrowed gift from the fire? The answer lies in adaptation. You'd curl against your kin, wrapped in layers, body heat mingling with theirs, and accept that survival is not just about personal strength but about collective warmth. This truth hums beneath every gesture in the camp. The sun finally crests, weak and pale, throwing gold across the snow. Its light glints off the ice-coating tree branches, turning the forest edge into a cathedral of glittering spires. You shiver, both from the imagined cold and the awe of such a sight. In this stillness, the camp's resilience glows brighter than the sunrise. Without modern warmth, these people shaped entire lives around the question of how to sleep, how to dream, and how to wake again with enough strength to continue. You take one last look at this frosty dawn arrival. The camp is stirring, fires crackling louder, voices rising, and yet the mystery of the night's survival lingers in the air. Tonight, you will follow them deeper into their shelters, closer to the heart of their winter endurance, to see how rest was carved from a world that offered little mercy. You press onward along a snow-packed trail that winds between the clustered lodges, the ground beneath your feet crunching like brittle glass. Each step echoes in the stillness, magnified by the frozen quiet that settles over the camp. There is no background hum of engines, no distant highway to mask the sound, only the rhythmic creak of snow compressing under your weight. You notice how narrow these paths are, barely wider than a single person, because energy here cannot be wasted on unnecessary clearing. Every shoveled line has purpose, each one a lifeline to warmth, food, or firewood. The sharp air tastes almost metallic on your tongue. Your nostrils sting, hairs inside freezing with every inhalation. You tug your cloak tighter, and in doing so, you feel the faint heat trapped beneath layers of hide. You imagine children hopping along behind their parents, leaving smaller tracks that quickly fill with powdery drifts. Dogs pad confidently ahead, their paws accustomed to the icy bite, fur frosted yet resilient. To your right, you see where the snowbanks rise taller than your shoulders, walls sculpted by both human hands and relentless wind. These barriers are not just obstacles, they are allies, redirecting gusts away from fragile shelters. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind here. Many winter camps were deliberately positioned near groves of trees or natural embankments, where wind could be softened and snow used as a shield. Location was everything. To choose poorly meant exposure, to choose wisely meant survival. Tribes carried centuries of knowledge about where the land offered its subtle protections. But let's pause with a curious detail. Some reports suggest that certain groups sprinkled ashes across paths to prevent them from icing over, a trick you might associate more with modern city streets than ancient camps. It gave traction in a world where one slip could break a bone and mean disaster. You picture the odd contrast. Fine grey ash against pristine white snow, a reminder that ingenuity often rests in the simplest gestures. Historians still argue whether these trails were more communal arteries or guarded passageways. Did every person move freely across the snowy web, or were some paths reserved for hunters, elders, or ritual purposes? The evidence is mixed, leaving you to imagine how rules of etiquette mingled with the necessity of survival. Either way, each step you take is on ground deeply trodden with meaning. Your senses heighten as you notice subtle signs of life pressed into the snow. Rabbit tracks hop in delicate arcs, vanishing beneath a mound. A faint trail of deer scatters into the trees, luring hunters outward. Even human prints differ: broad adult strides, smaller child steps, and the heavy drag of a laden sled. If you bend to touch the tracks, the snow is crusted, sharp enough to scratch your skin, yet beneath lies softer powder, muffled and forgiving. The sounds here are delicate but persistent. Far off, you catch the hollow thunk of someone splitting wood, each strike echoing like a heartbeat. Closer, the flap of a lodge cover rustles, releasing a puff of smoke and a child's laughter. and then silence returns, thick and blanketing, as if the snow swallows everything it touches. Imagine lying down in such quiet, the stillness heavy enough to lull your mind into sleep, though the cold would surely rouse you before dreams arrived. As you move along the packed trail, you realize that every pathway is layered with stories. Generations have walked these same patterns, the snow repacked again and again until it hardens like stone. In your mind, you can almost feel the rhythm of footsteps at dusk, hunters trudging home, women carrying bundles of gathered wood, elders moving carefully but steadily, all converging along these arteries of survival. What strikes you most is how the trails are not merely practical but also communal. They connect each family's shelter, weaving them together into something more than isolated lodges. They remind you that survival is rarely solitary here. Even sleep, the most vulnerable state of all, depends on collective work, clearing paths, tending fires, hauling furs, preparing food. The trail under your feet is proof of that interdependence, pressed into snow by countless souls. Your own breath quickens with the effort of walking. The cold bites your fingers, and you tuck them deeper into your mittens, grateful for the imagined insulation. You reflect on how every sensory detail, the sting in your lungs, the crunch of packed snow, the faint glow of firelight flickering between lodges, would have been part of daily life for those who truly lived this. To them, it wasn't exotic or harsh. It was simply winter, something endured with grit and quiet skill. At the end of the path, you glimpse a larger space, a central clearing where trails meet like spokes on a wheel. Fires flicker here, guarded and fed, and you sense this is where the pulse of camp beats strongest. The snow-packed trails have carried you into the heart of communal endurance. Here, warmth will gather, and stories will rise to remind weary bodies why it's worth surviving another frozen night. You leave the central clearing behind and step into one of the winter lodges, drawn by the rich scent of hides and the glow of firelight. Inside, the dim space feels worlds apart from the glittering snowfields you've just trudged through. The air is smoky and heavy, but compared to the frost outside, it is thick with comfort. You blink as your eyes adjust, and soon you notice the walls rising around you, not smooth wood or stone, but a patchwork of animal hides layered one over the other like protective skin. Each fur carries its own story. The sweep of a buffalo hide, thick and shaggy, the softer glint of deer pelts, the mottled texture of beaver fur. Together, they create a barrier that is both practical and symbolic, the line between freezing death and enduring warmth. The sensation of brushing your hand against one of these hides is unforgettable. They feel rough in some places, supple in others, worn smooth from years of use. They smell faintly musky, with the earthy aroma of animals, smoke, and human touch all mingling. To you, raised in a world of factory-made fabrics, it may feel strange, almost primitive. But to the people here, these hides are refined tools, perfected by generations of tanning, softening, and stitching. They are not crude improvisations, but carefully crafted armor against the cold. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Among plains tribes, buffalo hides were often the most prized for winter coverings. A single large hide could span across a lodge wall or drape across several sleepers, and when doubled, it became nearly impervious to cutting wind. Hunters knew to harvest the animals in late fall, when their coats were thickest, ensuring that the winter supply of warmth was secured. Without such foresight, the nights could easily turn deadly. And then comes a quirky tidbit. Did you know that some hides were deliberately decorated, even though their main purpose was insulation? Painted images, symbols, or dyes were added to certain skins, turning practical walls into living canvases. Imagine dozing off at night, half buried under pelts, while faint figures of animals or geometric designs watched over you. Warmth and art were not separate things here. They were stitched together. Historians still debate how much individuality was expressed in these painted hides. Were the designs purely spiritual and communal, or did families add their own touches as a form of identity? the way you might decorate a bedroom today. Some scholars argue that these symbols were almost like signatures, while others think they remained largely standardized. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but either way, the hides carried more than just warmth, they carried meaning. You settle lower inside the lodge, near the edge of a sleeping space. Here, bedding is layered thick, mats of reeds or woven grass beneath, hides stretched across, furs piled high. When you sink down, your body weight compresses the layers, releasing a faint crackle of dried reeds and a soft sigh of fur shifting into place. You imagine the relief of lying here after hours of walking frozen trails, muscles loosening, your back slowly warming against the compressed hides. The soundscape is intimate. Fire pops gently in the hearth at the center, sparks flaring upward toward the smoke hole. Soft voices murmur nearby, parents soothing children or elders humming low songs. Somewhere, a dog shifts and exhales, its body curled against the side of the lodge wall. All of this happens in a haze of warmth that seems miraculous compared to the icy air just outside. In this half-light, you can almost drift off. The furs rise around you like a cocoon, shutting out the frozen wind. Each hide adds a layer of protection not only against weather but also against fear. It's the knowledge that these layers mean survival, that you are wrapped in the strength of the buffalo, the deer, the beaver. The hides don't just keep you alive. They remind you that you are part of a chain of lives, connected through hunt, craft, and community. Your thoughts wander: how different is this from slipping beneath your own blankets at home? You have synthetic fibers, electric heat, climate control. Yet here, despite the lack of such luxuries, the experience of seeking warmth is universal. Your body recognizes comfort, your heart slows, your breath steadies. It is the same act, a human being curling into safety for the night. Someone across the lodge stirs, shifting a pile of furs over their shoulders. The rustle is soft, like waves of fabric. You notice how communal the arrangement island. Families do not each have their own separate beds but share broad sleeping platforms, lying close together beneath layers of hides. It is warmth built not just from material but from togetherness. As your eyes grow heavy in the fire's glow, you realize how profound these layered hides are. They are walls, blankets, symbols, and memories, all at once. Without them, no one in this camp could face the endless nights of winter. With them, people sleep, dream, and awaken again to another day of survival. And so, the hides and furs breathe their quiet promise: protection through the cold, endurance through the dark, and the soft, steady assurance that even in the harshest winters, warmth can always be found. You crawl back out into the crisp night air, the smell of smoke and hides clinging to your clothing. The snow stings your cheeks again, reminding you of just how thin the line is between comfort and danger. As you walk further into the camp, you notice another kind of dwelling rising from the frozen earth. Unlike the teepees, which taper sharply to the sky, these structures seem to hunker down into the land itself, their rounded shapes partially swallowed by the soil. You pause to study them. These are earth lodges, and they hold a secret, warmth gathered from beneath the very ground. Stepping closer, you see how their walls are built with a skeleton of timber poles, angled inward like a giant ribcage, then layered thick with grasses, reeds, and finally covered with packed earth. Snow lies on their roofs like icing, but instead of threatening collapse, it insulates further, sealing in precious heat. The entrance is low and narrow, forcing you to bend, almost crawl, to enter another clever way to keep drafts from stealing warmth. Inside, the difference is striking. The air is warmer, the ground more stable. You realize the floor dips slightly below the level of the surrounding land. By digging down, the builders made use of the earth's own steady temperature, a natural buffer against the brutal swings of winter weather. It feels quieter too, as if the earth itself muffles the howls of wind. A mainstream historical fact grounds this image. Earth lodges were common among tribes of the plains and the Missouri River Valley, like the Mandan and Hidatsa. These communities often built villages of dozens, even hundreds of such lodges, clustered close together. Each could house several families, sometimes 20 or more people, all gathered under one earthy roof. In winter, this concentration of bodies, fires, and thick insulation created pockets of surprising warmth. And here's a quirky little detail: some earth lodges had roofs sturdy enough to walk upon. Children would clamber up the slopes, playing games even in deep snow, their laughter echoing across the frozen village. Imagine sitting inside, drifting towards sleep, while faint thuds of running feet reverberated above you like muffled drums. It was a reminder that life, even in harshest winter, carried joy alongside survival. Historians still debate whether these lodges were primarily practical or also ceremonial. Some argue their construction mirrored cosmic symbolism, the circular form reflecting the universe, the central fire embodying the Sunday. Others suggest that while symbolism was present, the pressing reality of cold dictated their form. The debate leaves you picturing families curled around their hearths, perhaps not thinking of cosmic models at all, but simply of making it through the night. You sit at the edge of one sleeping platform, built of packed earth topped with mats and furs. Around the central fire, people gather, not all lying down yet. A few talk quietly, tending to tools or sipping broth from wooden bowls. The flames dance upward, their smoke funneled through a vent at the roof's peak, though much of it lingers, making the air hazy. The fire's glow flickers across the lodge walls, turning the earthen curves into a kind of womb, dark, protective, and strangely comforting. The sensation here is heavier than in the teepee. You feel wrapped not just in hides, but in earth itself. The walls are cool to the touch, yet they radiate steadiness, as though the land is cradling you. Your body relaxes in ways you didn't expect. Outside, storms may rage, but inside the earth lodge, there is the calm hush of endurance. A child nearby stirs, adjusting a rabbit fur blanket. A woman strokes her hair, humming softly. The song is low, almost indistinguishable from the crackle of firewood, but it weaves the moment together. Your eyelids flutter at the rhythm of it, lulled by the mixture of voice and flame. You can imagine falling asleep here, with smoke curling upward, heat seeping outward, and the steady weight of soil pressing gently from all sides. If you listen closely, you can hear water dripping faintly, where melting snow seeps through and freezes again, creating tiny crystals along the inner walls. The lodge breathes with the environment, absorbing and releasing in a cycle as old as the earth itself. This is not a fragile shelter, but a living system, resilient and responsive. The thought crosses your mind: what would it feel like to wake inside one of these lodges at dawn? You'd open your eyes to dim light filtering through the smoke hole, stretch stiff muscles against the reeds, and feel the warmth of family pressed nearby. The fire would be embers now, glowing red, waiting for new wood. And you'd rise, brush the sleep from your eyes, and step into the cold with a renewed sense that the earth itself had lent you strength to survive. So as you lie in this imagined space, half buried in earth and fur, remember this: these lodges were more than homes. They were lessons carved in soil, reminders that the land is not an enemy to fight, but an ally to embrace. In the heart of winter, they were sanctuaries of warmth, and in their silence, they whispered that survival could be found in the very ground beneath your feet. You pause at the threshold of another lodge, where the beating heart of winter life pulses strongest. Step inside, and your senses are engulfed by the glow and crackle of a fire rising from the central hearth. The flames lick upward, casting orange ripples of light across faces that circle it, their eyes reflecting both fatigue and reassurance. The hearth is not merely a convenience, it is survival itself. Without it, the cold would creep into every pore and freeze the marrow of your bones. Here, though, the fire is a living presence, as vital as breath. The warmth strikes your skin immediately, chasing away the sting of frost you've been carrying since stepping outdoors. You feel your shoulders unclench, your breath deepen, and a faint sweat bead along your brow, despite the frigid world just outside the lodge. Families huddle near, some stretched out under layers of furs, others sitting cross-legged, their hands extended to catch the waves of heat. The fire is never allowed to die completely. Embers glow even through the darkest hours, tended carefully, because to lose the fire in winter is to court death. It's well documented that across countless indigenous groups, the hearth served not just as a heat source but also as the axis of domestic life. Cooking, tool-making, conversation, and ceremony often revolved around it. To sleep beside the hearth was to rest within the camp's core. You imagine yourself curling close, lulled by the rhythmic pop of sap inside burning wood, the faint aroma of roasting meat blending with smoke, and the hush of whispers trailing into silence. And yet, you might be surprised to learn that fires indoors were not always roaring blazes. Too much flame meant too much smoke, and too much smoke meant burning eyes and choking lungs. Instead, fires were kept small and steady, coaxed like living pets rather than unleashed like wild beasts. A glowing bed of coals often provided more enduring comfort than high flames. You picture people adjusting logs with sticks, nurturing embers as though feeding them crumbs. Some evidence suggests there were disagreements, even within households, about how to manage the smoke. Should the vent be left open wider, letting warmth escape, or kept narrow, filling the lodge with haze but preserving heat? Anthropologists continue to puzzle over whether each family had standard practices or improvised nightly. Imagine lying under furs, eyes watering from smoke, yet reluctant to move, because stepping away from the fire's circle meant icy drafts. It was a delicate balance. Endure a little choking to preserve a lot of warmth. As you settle deeper into the imagined lodge, the fire seems almost hypnotic. Flames twist and curl, shadows flicker across the walls, and the shapes remind you of animals, trees, or spirits. Children stare with wide eyes, their dreams merging with the dance of light. Adults murmur softly, telling stories that rise and fall in rhythm with the sparks. This is where culture grows as much as warmth, knowledge, and memory carried in tales passed beside the fire. You notice too the soundscape, the soft hiss as sap bursts, the occasional crack that sends sparks shooting upward, the shuffling of feet as someone shifts closer. Against this backdrop, the voices are steady and low, like the heartbeat of a community. You lie down near the edge, where the heat is gentle rather than scorching, and pull a hide up to your chin. The texture of the fur is coarse at first, but softens as it warms. Oddly enough, not every fuel was wood. Some accounts mention dried buffalo dung used when timber was scarce, particularly on the plains. Imagine the peculiar smell, earthy and sharp, filling the lodge. To modern noses, it might seem unpleasant, yet to those who lived here, it was the fragrance of survival. You might wrinkle your nose at first, but soon you would accept it, maybe even associate it with security. The fire does more than warm bodies, it guards against the intangible. Many indigenous traditions spoke of fire as a sacred presence, a boundary against harmful spirits that prowled during the long night. When flames crackled, people believed they were not alone but accompanied by forces that protected them. The hearth was at once practical and mystical, a bridge between body and spirit. Your eyes follow the smoke curling upward to the vent in the roof. Sometimes it escapes in smooth streams, other times it drifts back down, weaving a grey veil through the room. The air feels thick, your throat dry, but your body loosens under the steady heat. You realize how sleep here is not accidental but orchestrated by centuries of practice. The fire is tended in shifts, one person always responsible for keeping it alive. Even in dreams, someone is awake, watching, ensuring the night passes safely. Experts remain divided on whether people preferred to sleep with their heads nearest the fire or farthest away. Some argue closeness offered immediate warmth but greater risk from sparks. Others suggest lying farther back gave steadier comfort, though with less intensity. In either case, it is clear that the positioning of sleep was not random. It was another layer of survival strategy, tested over generations. The imagery grows softer as you close your eyes. You hear a pot bubbling gently on the fire, releasing the scent of venison stew thickened with corn or beans. You hear the faint rustle of a hide flap shifting in the wind, and you feel the slow expansion and contraction of breath, not just yours but those of every person around you. The fire binds these rhythms together. Outside, the snow still falls, the night still howls, but inside, the fire is a world apart. It is warmth that reaches into your bones, light that softens the darkness, and reassurance that dawn will come. Without it, there would be no sleep, no survival, no stories. With it, entire nations endured winters that would flatten the unprepared. And so, as you lie near the fire, watching sparks climb like fleeting stars into the smoky roof, you understand why the hearth was never merely a tool. It was the heart itself, the pulse of winter life, the guardian of dreams, and the anchor that made each night survivable in a world without modern warmth. The smoke hole above your head draws your attention now, a small but vital gap cut into the roof of the lodge. You tilt your face upward, eyes half closed, following the spirals of grey vapor as they drift lazily toward that opening. Sometimes the smoke finds its way out, slipping into the night air with grace. Other times it clings stubbornly inside, making your lungs ache and your eyes water. This is not a flaw of design so much as a gamble with nature. A smoke hole is both salvation and nuisance. It's well established that many winter dwellings, whether earth lodges or teepees, relied on these vents. Without them, the interior would quickly become unlivable, choking with fumes until no one could rest. The vent was the only compromise between retaining warmth and preserving breathable air. If you've ever tried to camp in a tent with a fire, you know the challenge. Too much opening, and all your heat flees. Too little, and your chest tightens with smoke. These ancient engineers understood that same tension, and lived with it every single night. One curious detail surfaces in some accounts. People would sometimes position their sleeping spaces deliberately to catch the thin stream of clean air that drifted in through the hole. Imagine lying down in a crowded lodge, searching for that invisible thread of freshness, like a personal lifeline within the haze. It might not have been much, but in the midst of smoke-heavy air, it was enough to soothe the lungs. Archaeologists and ethnographers have long disagreed about how adjustable these vents really were. Some argue that coverings of hide could be shifted with poles to control airflow, a clever system akin to a movable skylight. Others maintain that such adjustments were too limited to be effective in harsh storms, leaving smoke to accumulate regardless of intent. The truth likely varied from one group to another, shaped by materials, geography, and tradition. The question lingers, unresolved, leaving us to imagine families improvising with each gust of wind. From where you sit, you can see how the hole serves another purpose too. It is a connection to the sky. Through it, moonlight and starlight sometimes fall in silvery shafts, piercing the smoky haze with fragile beauty. During storms, flakes of snow drift inside, hissing as they melt on the coals. Children stare upward at the shifting patch of sky, perhaps dreaming of spirits passing by. What seems to you like a simple vent becomes for them a window between worlds. The sounds reinforce this sense of connection. You hear the faint whistling of wind tugging at the opening, moaning like a low flute. Occasionally, a draft slips down, swirling through the lodge before vanishing again. The effect is both eerie and reassuring. The lodge breathes along with the fire, inhaling and exhaling through its narrow throat to the heavens. Oddly enough, some oral histories suggest that people timed their storytelling to the flow of smoke. When it rose steadily, it was said the spirits were listening, so stories were told with care. When the smoke wavered or circled, it signaled distraction, and conversation shifted to mundane topics. Whether you take this literally or as metaphor, it adds a layer of intimacy between daily life and unseen forces. You might wonder how anyone managed to fall asleep in such conditions, coughing and squinting through haze. Yet, over time, the body adapts. What would make you restless instead becomes background rhythm, the throat scratch a familiar companion, the eyes watering a sign of warmth rather than danger. Imagine curling beneath a hide, the smoke curling too, both of you weaving into the same nocturnal fabric. Some elders likely slept closer to the smoke hole itself, resting in slightly elevated places where drafts kept the air clearer. Children, on the other hand, were bundled low, their cradles tucked away from direct gusts. It is remarkable how each person in the lodge found a niche suited to their body's tolerance, as though the architecture itself guided them into proper placement. As you close your eyes, you picture the contrast. Above, the cold stars blaze in vast silence. Below, humans curl in warmth, smoke rising from their fragile shelter to mark their existence. That thin column of vapor, escaping through the hole, was visible from far off like a flag declaring, "We are here, we endure." In the end, the smoke hole was more than ventilation. It was a compromise, a symbol, a reminder that survival always dances between discomfort and relief. Through it, warmth remained possible, breath remained steady, and dreams could rise into the night sky like sparks seeking a home among the stars. You shift your gaze from the smoke hole back toward the edges of the lodge, where sleeping platforms line the walls like low shelves. These platforms are raised slightly above the floor, enough to keep sleepers off the cold ground but still close to the radiant heat of the fire. As you crouch closer, you notice the careful layering reed mats, woven grasses, and then generous piles of hides and furs. This arrangement is deliberate, the result of centuries of fine-tuning how to transform an earthen floor into a cradle of warmth. What we know for certain is that these sleeping platforms were not individual beds, but communal spaces. Families stretched across them shoulder to shoulder, children nestled between adults, elders tucked under thickest coverings. To you, accustomed to the privacy of mattresses and bedrooms, the closeness may feel startling. But here, proximity was its own insulation. Each body radiated heat, adding to the shared reservoir of warmth beneath the hides. One odd yet fascinating practice occasionally mentioned in accounts is the use of cattail or bulrush mats beneath the furs. These mats added springiness, but more importantly, they acted as insulation. Imagine the faint rustle of dried reeds under your back as you shift in your sleep, a sound like whispers from the marshes where they were harvested. It's a small detail, yet it reveals how people turned every natural material into a survival tool. Researchers still disagree about how standardized these platforms were across different regions. Some evidence suggests elaborate raised wooden frames in certain villages, while others relied on simpler earthen benches dug into the wall. The disagreement reflects just how diverse native technologies were adapted to local resources, climate, and cultural preference. What unites them, however, is the principle: never lie directly on frozen ground if you want to wake up alive. The sensory world of these platforms comes alive when you imagine lying down. Your body sinks slightly into the reeds, cushioned yet firm. The pelts drape heavily over you, their coarse exteriors rough but the underfur soft against your skin. You can smell the lingering musk of buffalo, the faint resinous odor of pine where mats were stitched, and the omnipresent overlay of wood smoke. Each inhale carries the memory of the material's origins: riverbanks, forests, prairies now woven together to guard you in the night. Children, restless by nature, would wriggle under the furs, giggling until hushed by tired parents. Elders might lie still, conserving energy, their breaths shallow but steady. Dogs often curled at the edges of the platforms, adding their warmth and vigilance to the circle. The arrangement was never random. It was a carefully orchestrated choreography of survival, where every presence had a place. You might be surprised to learn that bedding itself was sometimes perfumed with herbs. Sweetgrass or sage could be tucked into the layers, both for their scent and for their believed protective properties. Imagine drifting off with the soft sweetness of grass mingling with smoke, an aromatic lullaby that blurred the line between comfort and ritual. The debates continue among anthropologists about whether these platforms doubled as daytime spaces for socializing. Some argue they were strictly for rest, while others note that in cramped winter lodges there was little division. Children played on them, women worked on them, stories were told on them. In such a view, the platforms were not just beds but stages where daily life unfolded. As your own body relaxes in this imagined place, you notice how still the night becomes. The fire crackles, but most voices fade, replaced by the rhythmic breathing of dozens of sleepers. The sound is hypnotic, an undulating tide of inhalations and exhalations, carrying you into drowsiness. The fire's glow softens, and the hides press heavier, grounding you in a warmth that seems almost miraculous against the frozen world outside. And yet, there is fragility here. One log forgotten on the fire, one gap left unsealed in the wall, and the cold would slip back in. Sleep is always balanced on the knife edge of vigilance and trust. That is why families pressed close on these platforms, trusting in one another's bodies as much as in the hides and mats. So when you close your eyes and imagine yourself there, reeds beneath, hides above, kin beside you, understand that sleeping platforms were never just furniture. They were extensions of community itself, woven from earth and grass, bound by warmth and proximity. In their embrace, people learned to sleep not in isolation but in communion, resting in layers of material and human connection alike. You notice how close the sleepers are to one another. Arms brush in the dark, legs tangle beneath the hides, and every inhale is answered by another body's exhale. In this world, solitude is a luxury you cannot afford. Warmth comes not from distance but from the press of shoulders and the rhythm of shared breath. You realize that here, in a winter lodge, the phrase body heat takes on its truest meaning. Contemporary accounts remind us that across countless tribes, families slept in clusters, sometimes 3 or 4 people, under the same pile of hides. A single person wrapped alone might shiver, but pressed together, the human furnace became astonishingly effective. To you, used to sleeping alone in a wide bed, the intimacy might seem overwhelming. Yet here, it was the simplest, surest guarantee against freezing. One curious practice sometimes described in oral tradition involves deliberately arranging sleepers by age and role. Children, most vulnerable to cold, were tucked between parents, cocooned on both sides. Elders might be positioned deeper in the lodge, away from drafts, where the fire's heat was most steady. Even dogs or pups were invited into the pile, their small bodies contributing surprising warmth. Picture it: fur against fur, skin against skin, an entire household forming a living quilt. Some scholars argue over just how intentional these arrangements were. Did families meticulously assign positions each night, or did habits evolve naturally through repeated winters? The evidence is mixed, leaving you to imagine the nightly shuffle, bodies adjusting until everyone found a pocket of comfort. Whatever the case, the result was the same: a collective defense against the cold. Lying there, you would feel it instantly, the radiance of another body beside you. At first, it might make you restless, your personal space dissolved. But as the hours stretched on, you'd begin to treasure the steady warmth, the subtle rise and fall of a sibling's chest against your shoulder, the heartbeat of a parent felt faintly through hides. The cold outside could never replicate such intimacy. Oddly enough, some ethnographers recorded that children sometimes wriggled free from the communal piles, seeking their own adventure in a corner of the lodge. They often crept back quickly, noses numb, hands chilled, realizing independence came with an icy cost. The lesson was both immediate and unforgettable. Togetherness was not optional. The sensory detail here is striking. You imagine the heavy musk of multiple bodies mingling with the tang of wood smoke. The hides grow damp with condensed breath, frost forming along their outer edges. The heat is uneven, your toes may still feel chilled, but your chest stays warm, pressed against others. This unevenness is part of the experience, a reminder that survival isn't always comfortable, but always possible when shared. There's an echo here of something universal. Even in your own life, you've likely felt the instinct to huddle with others when the air grows cold. Think of power outages, camping trips, or nights when blankets weren't enough. That primal pull toward another body's warmth is ancient, coded into your very cells. The difference here is that for native communities in winter camps, it wasn't a rare exception, it was the nightly norm. Experts remain divided over whether this closeness fostered stronger social bonds or created tensions. Did constant contact breed affection, or did it spark irritations? Perhaps both. Imagine drifting into sleep soothed by a loved one's warmth, only to be jolted awake by a neighbor's elbow in your ribs. These contradictions made life rich, imperfect, and profoundly human. The psychological comfort may have been as important as the physical heat. To fall asleep in a circle of kin was to be reminded that you were not alone in facing the endless night. The cold world outside could rage with storms, but inside, pressed close with others, you carried a fortress of shared warmth. Dreams, too, must have carried this sense of collective safety visions, shaped not in isolation, but in the presence of a breathing community. As you lie in that pile of hides and bodies, your modern instinct might whisper discomfort. But soon as your skin adjusts to the mingled heat and your mind softens into drowsiness, you would recognize the genius of it. Shared body heat was not merely a necessity, it was an unspoken covenant of care. It said, "We survive together, or not at all." And so, in the winter lodges, sleep was not a solitary act but a communal ritual. Every night reinforced the truth that warmth comes from one another. Every dawn proved that huddling close, messy, intimate, imperfect was enough to keep life moving forward in a frozen world. Step back outside for a moment, and you see the camp transformed into something extraordinary. Snow piles high around the lodges, banked carefully by human hands. At first glance, you might think these drifts are obstacles, something to be cleared away. But here, snow is not an enemy. It is an ally, pressed into service as an insulator, sealing warmth inside fragile shelters. It's well known among archaeologists that many native groups used snow intentionally, piling it against lodge walls or around teepee bases to cut drafts. The trick was simple yet brilliant. Cold air cannot pass easily through compacted snow, and what seems freezing on the outside becomes a protective layer. You can picture families working together with shovels or even hands, patting the white mounds into place like clay. You might be surprised to learn that some winter shelters were even built directly from snow itself. Accounts of Inuit and other Arctic peoples describe igloos' domes carved from blocks of snow stacked in spirals. Inside, these spaces stayed astonishingly warm, often above freezing, while outside the temperature might plunge far below zero. Imagine lying inside such a dome, your body heat trapped in the compacted snow, while the howling wind rages beyond. Among plains and woodland tribes, though, snow was used more often as a supportive material than a structure. Packed around dwellings, it stiffened walls and muffled sound. At night, you'd hear the muffled hush as gusts of wind hit the drifts and simply slid away, unable to pierce the camp's defenses. Even today, researchers still discuss whether this technique was widely adopted out of necessity or whether it carried ceremonial meaning as well. Was snow merely insulation, or was it also seen as the earth's blanket, a sacred cover gifted in winter? The sensory world of such a snowbound camp is unforgettable. Outside, the cold bites at your face, but as you run your hands along the packed drifts, they feel smooth, firm, and surprisingly solid. The air close to the snow walls is hushed, absorbing sound so thoroughly that your footsteps seem swallowed before they echo. You feel as though the camp itself is wrapped in a cocoon. Inside, the difference is immediate. The warmth of the fire and bodies stays contained, rebounding off fur and earth, trapped by the icy barricades outside. Frost forms on the inner walls, delicate crystals glinting in firelight. Children sometimes press their fingers against these frosty patterns, marveling at how close beauty and danger could sit together. You can almost hear their laughter echoing softly, even as the cold nips at the cracks in the doorway. Oddly enough, some explorers recorded seeing snow deliberately shoveled onto lodge roofs as well. The added weight pressed hides tighter against the frame and increased insulation, much like the way a heavy quilt pins you into bed. To modern eyes, this might seem like tempting collapse, but to those who practiced it, the method was controlled, and the snow acted as an additional shield. Ethnographers continue to puzzle over whether snow piling was always planned or sometimes accidental, the natural drift of wind simply adopted as protection. Evidence is mixed, yet what matters more is the ingenuity behind using every element of the environment to survive. What threatens you in one form can save you in another. Imagine drifting into sleep in such a snow-protected lodge. Outside, the night howls, wolves cry in the distance, and the wind sweeps across the plains like an invisible hand. But inside, you are cocooned, fire flickering, furs piled high, snow mounded thick around the walls. The silence is deep, broken only by soft snores and the occasional crack of wood. You breathe in warmth, and for a few hours, the cold world disappears. The beauty lies in the paradox. Snow, the very symbol of winter's cruelty, becomes the shield that allows you to rest. The drifts outside, sculpted by hands and winds alike, are the quiet guardians of sleep. And so you learn a lesson that these communities knew instinctively, that survival means rethinking the elements, turning hardship into shelter, and finding comfort in what first appears hostile. As you wander further across the snowy camp, your eye is drawn to a very different kind of dwelling. Unlike the earth lodges that sink into the soil, these rise tall and lean, their frames of poles stretching upward in a graceful cone. These are teepees, portable homes built for motion, easy to raise and dismantle, yet surprisingly capable of holding warmth against the biting winds. Their pointed shapes cut elegantly into the winter sky, each one rimmed with snow along its base, each one glowing faintly from the fire within. It's well documented that the peoples of the plains, such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfoot, relied heavily on teepees for both summer mobility and winter survival. Designed for a nomadic life following the buffalo, they had to be sturdy enough to endure blizzards, yet light enough to carry across open grasslands. Their form was practical genius, long poles lashed together, covered in buffalo hides stitched tightly, with a smoke flap at the top to vent heat and haze. One curious detail you may not expect: teepees were sometimes lined with an extra layer of hides during winter. This inner cover created an insulating pocket of air between two walls, much like the double-paned windows you know today. Imagine the effect: wind hammering outside, but inside, a buffer of still air preserving warmth. It's the kind of clever adaptation that makes you realize these dwellings were not just temporary shelters, but refined engineering born from centuries of experience. Experts remain divided on just how warm teepees could become in sub-zero temperatures. Some argue that even with multiple hides and an interior fire, they remained chilly compared to earth lodges. Others insist that with proper insulation and careful placement of the fire, a teepee could be surprisingly comfortable, even in deep snow. Both views likely hold truth depending on wind direction, resources, and the skill of those tending the flames. Step inside one now, and you feel the immediate intimacy of its smaller space. The fire crackles in the center, its smoke funneling upward through the open flap. Around the edge, sleeping mats are laid in a circle, each space claimed by family members who curl beneath furs. The walls slope inward, making the room feel like a cocoon, and the poles above cross in a lattice, silhouetted against the smoky sky. You can almost hear the faint whistle of wind sneaking through seams, a reminder of the fragile boundary between life and death. Oddly enough, some early explorers noted how easily a teepee could be taken down, packed onto a travois, and moved in under an hour. Imagine that the very same structure that protected you from a blizzard one night might be folded away and carried across the plains the next morning. This mobility was not a luxury, but a necessity in a landscape where the herds dictated survival. Even in the heart of winter, adaptability was the rule. The sensory experience of sleeping in a teepee differs from that of an earth lodge. The ground feels closer here, the hides tighter, the space smaller. You curl in closer to your kin, the firelight painting shadows that climb the slanted walls. The smell of smoke is sharper, concentrated in the narrower space, and you find yourself breathing shallowly to adjust. The hides rustle faintly when wind presses against them, and snow outside sometimes slides down the conical sides with a muffled sigh. Some anthropologists suggest that the teepee's shape itself carried symbolic meaning, its rising cone echoing the connection between earth and sky. Others argue that practicality outweighed symbolism. The cone simply offered the strongest shape against the wind. The debate continues, but as you lie there, eyes following the smoke drifting upward, it's easy to believe that both meanings could coexist. Shelter that was at once functional and spiritual. Children here drift into sleep with stories whispered by their parents, eyes closing as sparks leap upward into the vent. Dogs curl at the edge, noses tucked beneath tails, while the fire shrinks into glowing coals. The hides above hold firm against the storm. The snow at the base thickens into insulation, and within this fragile cone, a family dreams together. As you imagine pulling a buffalo hide tighter around yourself, the wisdom of these portable teepees becomes clear. They were more than tents. They were lifeline structures that allowed entire nations to follow the rhythm of the land, to sleep through blizzards, and to awaken ready to move again. In their flickering light, you sense both fragility and resilience, woven together into a dwelling that has endured for centuries. The closer you look at the camp, the more you realize how central buffalo hides were to everything here. They are not just walls or blankets, they are the very fabric of survival. Picture one stretched taut over the frame of a teepee, its thick fur turned outward to deflect the icy wind. Another lies across a sleeping platform, its softness turned inward, warming the skin of those who curl beneath it. Every seam, every stitch, is a testament to how much life depended on the buffalo. Archaeological evidence shows that winter hides were harvested at just the right season. Buffalo killed in late autumn carried thick, dense coats, designed by nature to shield the animals from blizzards. When tanned and prepared, these hides became almost impenetrable barriers against the elements. Families might spend weeks working them, scraping, stretching, smoking, until they were supple enough to bend, but tough enough to withstand storms. To lie beneath one was to borrow the buffalo's strength for your own survival. One unusual practice recorded by early observers was the use of multiple hides layered together like shingles. Outer hides might be arranged so that snow and rain slid downward, while inner hides trapped precious heat. Imagine the care it took to position them correctly, knowing that one gap could let icy drafts creep in. It's the same logic you find in modern waterproof jackets. Layers protecting layers, each with its own purpose. But the debate among historians persists. Were buffalo hides primarily chosen for their physical properties, or did spiritual reverence also dictate their use? Some argue that the animal's role as a sacred provider of food, tools, shelter, clothing meant its hides carried symbolic power beyond practicality. Others suggest necessity came first, with spiritual meaning growing later from sheer dependence. The answer may be both, intertwined so closely that it's impossible to separate. The sensory detail of these hides is vivid. You run your fingers across the outer side, feeling coarse, wiry fur bristling like frozen grass. Flip it, and the underside is smooth, smoky from tanning, faintly oily with animal fat used for preservation. The smell is musky, a blend of earth and beast, lingering even after months of use. At night, wrapped tightly, you would breathe this scent in your dreams, comforted by its familiarity. You might be surprised to learn that buffalo hides were not only functional but sometimes decorative. Certain families painted them with geometric designs or scenes from hunts, transforming a simple blanket into a canvas of memory. Imagine drifting to sleep beneath such images, the day's victories or visions of the spirit world hovering above your resting body. Warmth and storytelling became inseparable. In the firelight, you picture children burrowing beneath a massive hide, only their noses poking out, eyes heavy with sleep. Elders, slower to warm, might drape additional layers over themselves, cocooning until their bodies relaxed. Dogs nestled close, their fur mingling with buffaloes, creating a tapestry of warmth woven from many lives. Ethnographers still discuss whether every family had equal access to high-quality hides. Did wealthier hunters or skilled tanners claim the thickest, warmest ones, leaving others to make do with thinner skins? Or was there a more communal sharing of resources in winter camps? Accounts vary, reflecting the diversity of cultures and the shifting realities of scarcity. As you curl into your imagined bedding now, you feel the immense weight of the hide settle across your body. It is heavy, yes, but the heaviness comforts rather than smothers. The cold cannot penetrate. You breathe deeply, inhaling the musky warmth, and your muscles relax in gratitude. The buffalo's body, once roaming the plains, now shelters you in the heart of winter. Oddly enough, some hides were so thick that families joked they were nearly impossible to fold or roll for travel. The humor lightens the harshness of the season, a reminder that even in survival, laughter found its place. Picture someone wrestling a stiff hide, grumbling, while children giggle nearby, proof that resilience isn't only in strength but also in spirit. And so, in the deep winter nights, buffalo hides became more than materials. They were guardians, canvases, companions. To sleep under them was to rest in the gift of a creature that gave everything, from meat to shelter, from sinew to stories. Each night spent beneath their warmth was another night the camp endured, another dream safely carried into morning. You step toward the edge of the camp now, where the cold sharpens into something even more biting. Here, families who live by the sea or along icy rivers keep a different kind of light glowing through the night. Duck beneath the flap of their shelter, and you're met not with the crackle of a wood fire, but with the steady, bluish flame of a stone lamp burning oil. The glow is gentler, lower, and the air carries the faint scent of seal fat. It feels less like a roaring hearth and more like a heartbeat, constant, understated, yet absolutely essential. Records from Arctic and subarctic peoples, Inuit, Yupik, and others describe these lamps, known as quillik, as the center of domestic life. Made from carved stone, often soapstone, the lamp held rendered oil from seal, whale, or fish. A moss or plant wick absorbed the liquid and burned with a steady flame. In winter, this single object provided light, heat, and even a surface for cooking. To imagine a night without one is to imagine darkness swallowing every corner of your dwelling. What might surprise you is how versatile these lamps were. Women tended them constantly, trimming wicks with delicate bone tools to keep the flame steady. The lamp could be brightened for weaving or dimmed for sleeping. With practice, a single quillik could burn for hours, its glow sustaining both warmth and morale. In a place where driftwood was scarce and fires were a luxury, this modest flame was everything. There's still discussion among historians about how much heat such lamps truly generated. Some suggest they were enough to keep small snow houses above freezing, making the difference between life and death. Others argue the warmth was modest, better for cooking and light than for heating a room. The truth, likely, lies in between heat amplified by furs, bodies, and the clever architecture of snow shelters. Close your eyes and imagine the sensory world of a lamp-lit night. Shadows sway across curved snow walls, turning the room into a flickering dreamscape. The flame hisses softly as oil burns, a sound as soothing as rain on canvas. The smell is pungent, fatty, almost sweet, clinging to your clothes and hair until it becomes inseparable from memory. You lie beneath hides, your face tingling with warmth where the light touches, your back still chilled by the icy floor. This uneven comfort is strangely calming, reminding you that survival is about balance, not perfection. Oddly enough, Explorers recorded stories of lamp flames being so steady that children would fall asleep watching them, hypnotized by the soft blue glow. In their dreams, the flame became the sun, promising that warmth would return again. Imagine drifting off with that image, an eternal miniature sun flickering above you, whispering that tomorrow is possible. Anthropologists continue to puzzle over the symbolic role of these lamps. Were they simply practical, or were they sacred representations of life itself? Many oral traditions point to the latter. The lamp flame was often associated with the spirit of the home, a reminder that even in darkness, light endured. Women who tended them carried immense responsibility, for to let the lamp go out meant letting the home itself fade into peril. The practical details remain fascinating. Oil had to be collected, rendered, and stored carefully, often in sealskin bags. Wicks were trimmed with precision to avoid smoking too heavily. Every family knew that their lamp's health mirrored their own. A sputtering wick warned of hunger, while a strong flame meant security. Now imagine yourself curled in one of these coastal shelters, the sound of the wind muffled by snow walls, the only illumination a small flame painting orange arcs on your hide blanket. Outside, waves crash against ice, their roar softened by distance. Inside, the steady hiss of the lamp is the last thing you hear before sleep. Your dreams mingle with its glow, fragile but resilient. The irony is striking. The coldest, harshest environments gave rise to the smallest, most delicate sources of warmth. Yet these tiny flames were enough to carry entire communities through endless winters. They remind you that survival isn't always about abundance. Sometimes it's about making one flame last the night, and trusting it will be enough to see the dawn. You linger now in the quiet of a lodge, where daylight filters weakly through the smoke hole, catching on the shimmer of tools laid neatly against the wall. They gleam faintly, made of bone and antler, shaped by careful hands into instruments that transform stiff, raw hides into bedding soft enough to cradle tired bodies. You crouch closer, running your eyes over scrapers, awls, and fleshing tools, each one smooth from years of use. These were not decorative objects. They were the difference between shivering on rough skins and sinking into supple blankets that held warmth through the night. Archaeologists have uncovered countless examples of these implements, confirming how central they were to winter survival. A bone scraper fashioned from a bison's rib could strip flesh and fat from a hide. An antler awl could punch holes for stitching, binding pieces together into mats or covers. To sleep on hides untreated was to risk discomfort and drafts. To prepare them properly was to create insulation as effective as any modern quilt. One unexpected trick described in early accounts involved using sand or even pumice to rub hides smoother, reducing stiffness. Imagine the rasping sound of stone against skin, the slow transformation of a stiff, frozen sheet into something flexible enough to drape across your shoulders. It was painstaking work, often performed by women, and it filled the hours of long winter nights with the rhythm of scraping and softening. But researchers still disagree on the exact methods used by different regions. Some insist smoking the hides was essential, infusing them with protective oils and a pungent scent that lingered in every lodge. Others argue that oiling with animal fat achieved a softer texture, though it made the hides heavier. Evidence suggests both methods were used, depending on climate and resources. The debate continues, leaving us to imagine the variety of scents and textures filling winter shelters across the continent. The sensory details are unmistakable. As you touch one of these hides, it creaks slightly, pliant but firm. The smell is sharp, smoke, fat, and the earthy musk of animal clinging to every fiber. The tools themselves feel cold in your hand, their edges worn smooth but still strong. You can almost hear the scraping echo in your ears, a repetitive sound that might lull you if you were lying nearby, drifting into sleep as others worked by the fire. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention that children were given miniature scrapers to mimic the work of adults. They learned by copying, their tiny hands making smaller arcs against scraps of hide. It was both play and practice, preparing them for the day when survival would depend on their skill. Picture a little one curling up afterward beneath the very fur they had helped prepare warmth earned by their own small effort. The tools weren't only for bedding, of course. They crafted clothing, moccasins, and tent covers. But at night, when you settled into your sleeping space, the difference was felt most vividly. A properly softened hide draped fluidly across your body, holding heat without stiffness. A poorly prepared one cracked, shifted, or let drafts sneak through. The quality of your sleep was tied directly to the craftsmanship of these humble bone and antler tools. Ethnographers continue to marvel at the efficiency of such simple instruments. In a modern world obsessed with metal and machines, it is easy to underestimate how effective bone and antler could be. Yet these communities proved otherwise. What mattered was not the material but the knowledge etched into its use. As you imagine lying back now, wrapped in hides softened by countless hours of scraping, you feel a deep appreciation for the labor behind every fold of warmth. Each blanket is not just the gift of an animal, but also the patient work of human hands. Every stitch, every softened seam, is a story of resilience written into fabric. And so, as you drift into sleep in this imagined lodge, the quiet scraping still echoes faintly in your ears. It is the lullaby of survival, a rhythm that turned bone into tools, hides into bedding, and bitter winter nights into places of rest. Without these humble instruments, warmth would have been fleeting. With them, entire families could dream beneath the steady glow of firelight, wrapped in layers of comfort that were both natural and handmade. You settle deeper into the lodge, and soon your nose catches something unexpected. It's not just smoke or the musk of hides, it's the faint, sweet tang of herbs slowly releasing their fragrance into the air. Someone has tossed a bundle of sage onto the fire, and the grey-green leaves curl and crackle, filling the room with a sharp, cleansing scent. You lean closer, inhaling, and realize this was not merely to mask odors. It was a comfort, a ritual, and sometimes even a medicine. Historical accounts confirm that many native communities relied on plants like sage, cedar, or sweetgrass to brighten long winter nights. These herbs burned with distinctive aromas, believed to purify spaces and calm spirits. They also had practical value. Cedar's resinous smoke could repel insects, while sage cleared musty smells from hides dampened with condensation. It's remarkable how one small addition to the fire could transform the atmosphere of a shelter. You might be surprised to learn that some herbs were tucked directly into bedding. Sprigs of sweetgrass, braided and dried, could be woven into mats or hidden beneath hides, releasing fragrance when pressed by the weight of bodies. Imagine lying down after a long day in the snow, pulling a fur up to your chin, and catching the faint perfume of plants harvested in warmer months. It was like keeping a piece of summer alive in the depths of winter. Scholars still debate how much of this use was purely practical and how much carried spiritual weight. Some argue that burning herbs was primarily about improving air quality in cramped, smoky lodges. Others emphasize their role in ceremonies, ritual smudging to cleanse negative energies and invite dreams free of harm. Perhaps both were true, each fire a mixture of medicine and meaning. The sensory richness is undeniable. As the herbs burn, smoke thickens with a sharper edge than wood alone. Your throat tingles, but in a refreshing way, and the aroma lingers on your skin. The sound is gentle, a soft hiss as oils are released, followed by a faint crackle. Around you, people breathe deeply, their eyes softening, shoulders relaxing. As though the plants reach into more than just lungs, they ease minds too. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention cedar boughs laid across the floor of shelters before bedding was spread. These layers not only added insulation but released fragrance when walked upon. Children may have giggled at the crunch underfoot, while adults appreciated the subtle comfort it offered. Even the simple act of stepping into a lodge could feel welcoming when the air smelled of cedar instead of damp hides. Imagine drifting towards sleep with these scents weaving around you. Outside, Snow falls heavy and silent, pressing down on the world. Inside, the air is alive with the sweetness of burning grass, the resinous depth of cedar, the sharp clarity of sage. The herbs mingle with smoke, creating a kind of incense that blurs the line between survival and serenity. Researchers continue to wonder how much these aromatic practices shaped the psychology of winter life. Did the familiar smell of sage reassure children, the way lavender soothes you today? Did cedar smoke, drifting upward, feel like a bridge between the material and the sacred? What's clear is that these scents created continuity, linking one winter to the next, one generation to another. As you pull a hide tighter around your shoulders in this imagined space, the fragrance clings to the fabric. You close your eyes, and for a moment, the walls of the lodge seem to breathe with you. The herbs whisper of summer meadows, of green forests, of times when warmth was easy. They remind you that even in the coldest months, people carried memory and hope into their dreams. So the night becomes not only a place of endurance but of gentle ritual. Sleep is guided not just by fire and furs, but by the invisible threads of scent, weaving calm through the air. In this way, herbs became companions to rest fragile, fragrant guardians that turned smoke-filled lodges into sanctuaries of warmth and spirit alike. The fire has burned low now, its light dim, and your attention shifts to a smaller bundle tucked near the warmest part of the lodge. There, a baby lies swaddled so tightly in furs that only its face peeks out, cheeks rosy with the heat of sleep. You watch as the infant breathes steadily, its tiny chest rising and falling beneath rabbit fur wrappings. The stillness of the night is broken only by a soft whimper, quickly soothed by a mother's gentle hand stroking across the bundle. What we know from ethnographic records is that native families often crafted cradleboards or swaddling wraps lined with the softest materials available: rabbit, squirrel, or even bird down. These were not mere luxuries but essential safeguards. Children's bodies cooled quickly, and without careful protection, frostbite or worse could set in. The cradleboard, often padded with furs and propped near the fire, became both bed and guardian. You might be surprised to learn that moss was sometimes used as diapering material inside these cradles. Dried and softened, it absorbed moisture while adding a cushion. Mothers replaced it frequently, ensuring babies stayed dry and comfortable through the night. Picture the faint, earthy smell of moss mingling with smoke and fur, the natural equivalent of baby powder, but harvested from streams and forests. Researchers continue to debate whether infants were always kept close to fires or sometimes placed in colder spots, wrapped in many layers, to accustom them gradually to the chill. Some oral traditions suggest exposure toughened their bodies, while others emphasize the need to shield them constantly. Perhaps both practices coexisted, shaped by circumstance, season, and family belief. The sensory world of these infant beds is tender. The fur is unbelievably soft, tickling against a mother's fingers as she tucks it closer. The cradle creaks faintly when adjusted, its wooden frame warmed by the fire. The child's breath is sweet and warm, misting briefly in the cool drafts that still snake along the floor. You can almost hear the soft hum of a lullaby, words too quiet to catch, vibrating like a heartbeat against the still air. Oddly enough, some cradleboards were decorated with beads, quills, or charms meant to protect the child. These adornments dangled softly as the baby shifted, catching the firelight. They weren't simply aesthetic, they were symbols of prayer and protection, reminders that sleep was a vulnerable journey and needed safeguards beyond physical warmth. The entire community often shared responsibility. Older siblings might sit nearby, tasked with watching the cradle through the night. Elders sometimes told stories over the sleeping infant, believing words could shape the child's dreams. Sleep here was not an individual act but a collective promise that the youngest would wake safely to see another day. Imagine yourself as that infant for a moment, cocooned in warmth so complete that the winter outside ceases to exist. You cannot move much, but you don't need to. Every sense is flooded with reassurance. The heat of the fire, the weight of furs, the faint vibration of song, the steady murmur of voices close by. The world beyond the hides and snow is irrelevant. All that matters is the cocoon. Some anthropologists note how these swaddling traditions carried lifelong influence. To grow up, pressed close in community, wrapped in hides, taught that security came not from solitude but from connection. Babies learned from their first nights that warmth was a shared experience, survival a collective act. Even in sleep, this lesson seeped into bones and breath. As the mother leans over now, pulling the cradle board a little closer to the fire, you sense the quiet rhythm of care repeated across generations. Night after night, winter after winter, children were kept safe not by machines or manufactured fabrics, but by the ingenuity of hides, moss, and loving hands. And so, when you close your eyes in this scene, you realize that sleep in a winter camp was never just about endurance. It was about trust. Trust that mothers would tend the flames, that siblings would keep watch, that furs would hold, that the cradle's soft lining would protect. In that trust, infants dreamed peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of both family and the natural world. You shift your gaze across the dim firelight, and there, close to the heart of the lodge, sit the elders. Their faces are lined with years of winters endured, their movements slower but steady, their presence anchoring the room like stones in a river. They do not toss or fidget as the young do. Instead, they sit or lie in stillness, wrapped in heavy robes of fur, conserving energy in a way that seems almost meditative. It's clear from oral traditions that elders held a special role during these bitter nights. They were keepers of memory, teachers who carried the lessons of past winters into the present. To watch them in the firelight was to see a living reminder. Survival is not about rushing, but about endurance, a quiet patience that outlasts the storm. Children learned by example, observing how the old ones breathed slowly, how they wasted no movements, how they let calm settle into their bones. One detail that might surprise you is that elders were often given the warmest spots in the lodge, not out of indulgence, but respect. Nearer the hearth, where the heat was steady and draughts less cruel, they slept more comfortably, their frail bodies protected by the warmth they had once worked so hard to secure for younger generations. This was a reciprocal circle of care. They had safeguarded the community in their strength, and now the community safeguarded them in age. Yet historians remain divided about whether these elders were entirely shielded from hardship, or if they bore a different kind of burden. Some argue they were sheltered, excused from heavy tasks in winter. Others suggest their wisdom carried responsibilities that kept them awake longer, watching fires, whispering prayers, reminding restless families of traditions. The truth likely shifted with circumstance. Sometimes the elders rested deeply, sometimes they bore the night's heaviest weight. The sensory atmosphere around them is distinct. Their robes are thicker, layered with buffalo hides lined in fur, heavy enough that the garments themselves seem immovable. When they shift, you hear the rustle of pelts, a dry, hushed sound. Their breath is slower, audible only when you lean close. Their voices, when they speak, are gravelly and deliberate, carrying authority not from force but from gravity. Oddly enough, some oral histories recall elders offering gentle instructions even as others drifted into sleep. They might hum an old song, not to entertain but to steady nerves. They might tell a short parable, words barely audible, meant to guide the minds of listeners into calm before rest. Imagine lying there, eyes half closed, as an elder's cracked voice becomes the final sound you hear before dreams. Anthropologists continue to discuss whether this kind of stillness was cultural discipline or simply survival instinct. Did elders cultivate composure as a lesson for the young, or did their bodies naturally slow after decades of winters? Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. In their presence, the lodge itself seemed steadier, calmer, more resilient. You can picture a child stirring in the night, frightened by the howl of wind against the walls. An elder, without rising, murmurs reassurance. The snow is our blanket. The fire is our heart. Rest. The child sighs and settles again, the words soothing not because they promise comfort, but because they come from a voice that has lived through every kind of storm. The fire crackles, the night deepens, and still the elders rest in their composed way. Their dreams, perhaps, wander further back than others to hunts long past, to faces no longer present, to seasons where they once tended the fires themselves. And yet, they remain here, part of the living circle, carrying lessons without speaking them aloud: patience, stillness, endurance. So when you imagine lying in that lodge, you realize the gift they offered was not only knowledge but presence. In the darkest hours, their calm was a blanket as vital as any hide. The warmth of their bodies might have faded, but the warmth of their example burned steady. And in that example, entire families found the courage to close their eyes and sleep through another bitter winter night. The evening deepens, and with it comes the slow ritual of preparing food before sleep. The air inside the lodge grows richer now, layered not only with wood smoke and fir, but with the aroma of bubbling stew. A pot, blackened from countless fires, hangs over the coals, steam curling upward in fragrant ribbons. You lean closer and inhale. There's the gamey scent of venison, the earthy undertone of beans, the sweetness of dried berries rehydrating in the broth. Every whiff tells a story of foraging, hunting, and preservation carried through long months. Archaeological findings confirm that many tribes preserved food in autumn specifically for winter nights like this. Corn dried on the cob, beans stored in woven bags, strips of buffalo or deer meat cured into jerky. These staples meant that even when storms closed in, meals could still be simmered over the hearth. By the time the stew was ladled into wooden bowls, it was more than nourishment. It was warmth that began inside the belly and spread outward, loosening stiff muscles and calming minds for rest. One detail you might find delightful is the practice of adding marrow bones to the pot. Cracked open, they released rich fat that thickened the broth and offered crucial calories. Imagine fishing out a piece of bone, sucking the warm marrow, and feeling strength flood back into your body. In a world without modern vitamins, marrow was treasured like liquid gold. There's still discussion among food historians about just how varied winter meals were. Some argue that monotony dominated soups and stews repeated endlessly until spring. Others point to evidence of dried fruits, nuts, and even sweet treats crafted from honey or maple sugar, suggesting a surprising variety. The debate lingers, but either way, each meal was precious, each bite a link between endurance and comfort. The sensory details are overwhelming. You hear the faint bubbling of the pot, the rhythmic stir of a wooden ladle scraping against its sides. The steam fogs the air, warming faces as families lean in. When you lift a bowl, the wood feels hot in your palms, the liquid inside thick, hearty, almost too much for a sleepy stomach. But you eat anyway, savoring the way heat spreads down your throat and into your core. Oddly enough, some oral histories mention people deliberately eating heavy meals before sleep, believing that fullness kept the body warmer through the night. A full stomach was not only satisfying but protective, a buffer against the long hours when fires might burn low. Picture the comfort of lying back afterward, burrowed under furs, drowsy from warmth that glows both inside and out. And then there's the communal rhythm. Food is not eaten in silence. People murmur thanks, laugh softly at a child spilling stew, share bites with dogs waiting eagerly at their feet. The act of eating together is as important as the calories themselves. In sharing, bonds are reaffirmed. In nourishment, sleep becomes possible. Ethnographers have noted how the memory of taste intertwined with memory of place. To eat venison stew in winter was to recall the autumn hunt. To sip corn broth was to remember the summer harvest. In this way, each meal was not just sustenance but continuity, linking one season to the next, one generation to the other. Now imagine finishing your bowl, setting it aside, and sinking beneath hides. The smell of stew lingers in the air, comforting in its heaviness. Your stomach is full, your body warm, your mind eased by the familiarity of flavors passed down for centuries. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, food has become a shield against cold and despair alike. So it is no exaggeration to say that winter meals before sleep were as crucial as fire or furs. They gave strength, comfort, and reassurance. They reminded families that they had survived the day, that they had enough to face the night, and that in the morning, life would begin again with another pot simmering over glowing coals. The stew pots have been emptied, the bowls set aside, and the fire tends now toward a gentle glow. The lodge quiets, yet the night is not quite ready for silence. A few voices rise softly, weaving into the smoky air, and you realize that songs are beginning, melodies meant to ease minds and bodies into rest. These aren't loud or raucous. They are slow, rhythmic, almost like lullabies stretched across generations. Ethnographers note that winter evenings were often filled with such songs, passed down by elders or improvised in the moment. Some were practical, teaching children rhythms of language or recounting hunts. Others were purely for comfort, tones designed to calm the restless. The repetition of verses, paired with the crackle of the fire, created an atmosphere where eyelids grew heavy, almost without effort. You might be surprised to learn that certain songs were believed to influence dreams themselves. A parent might sing about safe travels, good hunts, or protective spirits, guiding the subconscious of their children toward those very visions. Imagine falling asleep not to silence, but to words painting safe paths through the unknown territory of dreams. Anthropologists still debate the exact role of these winter songs. Were they primarily educational, embedding memory into the minds of the young, or were they more spiritual, acts of invocation and prayer? The truth, as always, may be both. What is clear is that they were powerful tools, able to soften fear and strengthen community, even as storms raged outside. The sensory details here are vivid. The voices are low, some gravelly with age, others clear and high. The firelight flickers across faces, making shadows dance in rhythm with the music. The air tastes of smoke and herbs, but now it feels lighter, buoyed by the cadence of song. You find yourself breathing slower, matching the pace of the melody, your heart steadying into calm. Oddly enough, some travelers describe dogs joining in, howling softly along with human voices. Rather than disrupt, their cries seemed to blend, turning the lodge into a chorus that acknowledged every living being in its circle. Imagine drifting off as human voices hum in one ear, canine echoes in the other, together forming an unlikely harmony. Children curl closer beneath furs, lulled not just by warmth but by the comfort of familiar melodies. Their eyes close as rhythms seep into dreams, binding memory and emotion in ways no silence could. Adults too feel their muscles loosen, shoulders sinking lower, as song replaces worry with something timeless. Some researchers point out how music alters perception of time. In winter, when nights stretched impossibly long, songs marked hours, made darkness feel less endless. What could have been oppressive silence became filled with story and rhythm. Sleep came not as escape, but as a natural continuation of melody. Now imagine yourself there, half awake, listening. A voice hums a phrase again and again, until it feels less like a song and more like a pulse, a vibration inside your chest. Sparks leap upward, the smoke hole frames a few scattered stars, and you are suspended between wakefulness and dreams. The song carries you across that fragile threshold, reassuring you that you are safe, that the community holds you, that the cold cannot reach what is kept in the circle of voices. And so, winter songs before sleep were not entertainment alone. They were medicine, memory, prayer, and lullaby bound together. They smoothed the passage into dreams, keeping fear at bay, and reminded every sleeper, child, adult, or elder that even in the harshest winters, the night could be made gentle through the power of sound. The lodge is hushed now, voices fading, the fire dimming to its quiet core of embers. You lie back, eyes drifting shut, and soon you understand what the songs have been preparing you for dreams. For the people here, sleep was never just physical rest. It was a portal, a chance to step into another realm where guidance could be sought and futures glimpsed. Historical records show that many native traditions placed great importance on dreams. They were not dismissed as random flickers of the mind, but treated as meaningful messages. Dreams might reveal where herds were moving, whether hunts would succeed, or what dangers awaited. Waking and sharing these visions was as vital as recounting real events. To dream was to converse with forces beyond the visible. You might be surprised to learn that some individuals undertook deliberate efforts to cultivate dreams. A young hunter might sleep with a special object, a feather, a painted stone, or even a pouch of herbs placed near his head, hoping to summon visions of strength or guidance. Imagine lying beneath firs, one hand curled around such a talisman, heart thudding with anticipation of what images the night might bring. Researchers continue to debate how much dreams directed daily choices. Some argue they were central, guiding hunts and decisions with authority. Others suggest they were interpreted more loosely, folded into wider patterns of storytelling and intuition. Either way, dreams were woven into the fabric of survival, shaping how people faced the next day's challenges. The sensory world of a dream-filled night is vivid even before sleep takes hold. The fire's glow pulses against your closed eyelids. The warmth of kin beside you steadies your breath. The faint scent of sage or cedar lingers, almost like a protective veil. Within this cocoon, the boundary between waking and dreaming blurs. Your ears still catch the crackle of embers, yet in your mind, images begin to drift like smoke, forming shapes that feel more real than the lodge itself. Oddly enough, oral histories recall entire communities discussing dreams at dawn, comparing visions as though piecing together a larger puzzle. One person might see a buffalo leading them east, another might dream of a frozen river, and together the messages built a map of possibilities. Dreams were not isolated, they were shared, tested, and folded into collective wisdom. Imagine yourself drifting into such a dream now. You walk across endless snow, guided by a flickering flame that dances just out of reach. You hear the distant echo of drums, though no one plays them. A buffalo appears, breath steaming, its eyes locking with yours as if to speak. You wake with your heart pounding, certain the image matters. And in this world, it does. Your dream would be told, weighed, and perhaps acted upon. Anthropologists remain intrigued by how dreams blurred the boundary between body and spirit. Did sleepers feel they left their lodges, traveling across landscapes unseen? Or did they believe spirits entered their shelters, whispering in the smoke and shadows? The answers vary, but the effect is clear. Dreams gave meaning to the night, turning sleep into a form of dialogue. As you sink deeper, you realize that here, to sleep was to participate in something larger. Rest was not wasted time, but an opportunity to gather visions. In this sense, the harshness of winter became a gift. The long nights allowed longer dreams, more messages, more guidance. So when you imagine closing your eyes in that fur-lined lodge, you understand that the act of dreaming was as essential as the fire, the hides, or the food. It was another layer of survival one, not against the cold, but against uncertainty itself. In dreams, tomorrow could be glimpsed, fears soothed, and courage renewed. And so, through the dark of winter, families did not merely endure, they dreamed their way forward. The dreams are flowing quietly through the lodge now, but not everyone is asleep. Someone stirs by the fire, crouching to nudge a glowing log into place. Sparks rise and vanish into the smoke hole, and the ember bed brightens again, pulsing red and orange. This is the firekeeper's task, a duty that passes from one person to another through the long night. Without such vigilance, the coals might fade, and with them, the fragile warmth that keeps the community alive. Historical descriptions often note that tending the fire was shared work. Adults rotated the responsibility, sometimes mothers, sometimes fathers, sometimes older children learning the seriousness of their role. To be trusted as fire watcher was to be trusted with lives. One slip into negligence could mean waking to a frozen lodge and scrambling to spark new flames. Imagine the pressure of sitting in half-darkness, shivering, while everyone else sleeps. Your only companion, the crackle of wood and the whisper of wind outside. One curious detail preserved in oral accounts is the way some keepers spoke softly to the fire as they fed it. A log was not tossed but placed carefully, with words of thanks murmured under breath. The fire was not just fuel, it was kin, an ally that deserved respect. You can almost hear the faint rustle of someone whispering as they press kindling close, treating the flame as a living guest rather than a tool. There's still discussion among historians about whether firekeepers truly stayed awake the entire night or relied on embers to sustain themselves between shifts. Some evidence suggests carefully built coal beds could last until morning with minimal tending. Others insist that at least one person remained alert, eyes scanning the glow, ears tuned to every pop and hiss. The question lingers, leaving you to picture both scenarios: the faithful watch and the trust in coals that smoulder like sleeping guardians. The sensory world of this vigil is profound. The lodge is silent except for the breathing of sleepers. Shadows dance across firs as the fire flares with each adjustment. The smell is richer now, smoke mixed with resin as fresh wood releases its oils. The floor is cold where the watcher kneels, but the heat on their face is sharp, almost scalding. Every shift in the fire's rhythm feels momentous, as if the whole night hinges on this small flame. Oddly enough, some stories describe children waking in the night to see sparks shooting upward, mistaking them for stars sneaking into the lodge. They would ask the watcher if the sky had come inside, and the adult would smile, whispering that the fire was just playing. These quiet exchanges softened the fear of darkness, turning watchfulness into reassurance. Experts remain divided about whether these fire duties carried ceremonial weight. Was the watcher merely practical, or was there a sacred aspect to guarding the flame? Some traditions describe firekeepers as spiritual protectors, ensuring that not only warmth but also harmony remained intact until dawn. Others suggest practicality dominated. Someone simply had to keep the embers alive. Perhaps both were true, depending on the night, the people, and the storm outside. Now imagine yourself in that role, alone by the fire. You hear the wind clawing at the lodge walls, snow pelting against the hides. Inside, the silence of sleepers surrounds you, fragile and absolute. You feed the fire, watch the coals brighten, and feel both pride and pressure in your chest. Your eyelids grow heavy, yet you fight sleep, knowing the community depends on you. Each moment is stretched, every breath a tether between survival and disaster. And yet, in this half-silent vigil, there is peace. You are part of something larger, a guardian of warmth for those who dream. You whisper to the flame, stroke it with a stick, and let the hours pass. When another adult relieves you, or when the first light of dawn breaks through the smoke hole, you sink into rest with satisfaction. The night has been kept, the fire endured, and life will continue another day. So you see, guarding the fire was not just labor but devotion. It was the quiet promise, repeated every night of winter, that someone would always stay awake so others could sleep, that no ember would be left to fade, and that warmth, fragile but steadfast, would last until morning. The firekeeper's whispers fade, and your ears tune to the world beyond the lodge walls. The night is not silent. Even muffled by snow, the wilderness speaks in voices that both comfort and unsettle. You close your eyes, and each sound sharpens against the backdrop of stillness. The long, haunting call of an owl, the distant yip of coyotes, the low, drawn-out howl of a wolf. These are not intrusions. They are the night's own music, stitched into the fabric of sleep. Accounts from explorers and oral traditions alike remind us that native families knew these sounds intimately. They could distinguish the cry of a hunting wolf from the playful chorus of pups. They knew which bird's call warned of approaching weather, and which was nothing more than chatter in the trees. Where you might hear only menace, they heard meaning. A camp, attuned to its surroundings, could rest more securely, knowing what each sound signaled. You might be surprised to learn that some children were lulled by these very noises. Parents reassured them that owls carried wisdom, that coyotes were tricksters whose laughter danced through the dark, and that wolves were kin rather than enemies. Imagine drifting into sleep not in fear of howls, but in comfort that your extended family of the forest was near. Scholars remain divided over how much of this interpretation was practical and how much was spiritual. Were wolves primarily seen as ecological companions, helping thin herds and keep balance? Or were they spirit guides, their howls carrying messages across unseen worlds? The ambiguity persists, but what matters most is the way sound anchored people in the night, turning the unknown into something recognizable. The sensory details are vivid when you picture them now. The snow dampens most noise, but animal calls cut through sharply, echoing off frozen trees. The air feels colder when silence stretches too long, as if even breath is frozen. Then, a sudden hoot breaks the quiet, and the sound reverberates against the lodge walls, startling you for an instant before it softens into background rhythm. Oddly enough, some oral histories describe children imitating these calls from inside their lodges, giggling as they mimicked wolves or owls. Adults often hushed them, worried the noise might draw predators closer, but the play still happened, proof that even fear could be turned into game. Picture the sound of a small child's squeaky howl, followed by muffled laughter beneath blankets. Lying here, you sense how these nighttime voices shaped the dream world. An owl's hoot might seep into sleep, reappearing in visions as a messenger. A coyote's yip might become laughter in a dream, a trickster guiding or teasing you. In this way, the border between waking and dreaming blurred further, each cry outside resonating with inner landscapes. Researchers often point out that in environments without mechanical noise, the human ear becomes astonishingly sensitive. A twig breaking miles away can feel immediate. A howl from beyond the horizon can seem close enough to touch. To sleep in such conditions was to live with constant awareness, even in slumber. Safety meant not shutting out the world but letting its sounds wash over you, learning which tones signaled danger and which promised calm. Imagine yourself now, lying beneath heavy hides, listening. The fire hisses softly beside you, but your focus is on the outside chorus. A wolf howls again, closer this time, its voice long and mournful. Your heart beats faster, but then slows, as you remember you are not alone. The family beside you breathes steadily. The lodge walls stand firm. The fire glows red. The sound becomes less threat and more lullaby, a reminder that life continues beyond human shelters. So the night passes in dialogue, the camp within, the wilderness without. Together they form the song of survival, a layered harmony where no voice is wasted. And in that harmony, sleep comes, guided by owls, wolves, and coyotes whose cries carve the darkness into something alive, something deeply human, something safe enough to dream beneath. The cries of animals fade, replaced by a heavier silence that signals something more menacing, a storm rolling in. The air outside thickens, and soon the first blasts of wind slam against the lodge walls. Snow hisses as it pelts hides and earth, seeping through cracks if left unguarded. Inside, families stir, drawing closer to the fire, checking that furs are secure and children are well covered. The lodge shudders faintly, like a ship caught in a frozen sea. Archaeological and ethnographic records confirm that blizzards were among the greatest threats to winter camps. Temperatures could plunge so fast that frostbite claimed skin in minutes. Visibility dropped to nothing, trapping hunters outside or isolating entire camps. For many, survival meant preparation, storing extra firewood, keeping food close, and ensuring shelters could withstand hours or even days of relentless snow and wind. You might be surprised to learn that some groups deliberately built temporary snow shelters during storms, even when lodges were nearby. Packed snow, when sculpted properly, resisted wind better than hides or bark. Families caught away from camp could huddle inside makeshift domes or trenches, their own breath warming the walls. Imagine crouching shoulder to shoulder, listening to the muffled roar outside, while the snow itself became both roof and refuge. There's ongoing debate among historians about how often entire lodges collapsed during severe storms. Some argue they were sturdy enough to endure most conditions, reinforced with snow piled against their bases. Others insist collapses were inevitable, forcing families to rebuild quickly once skies cleared. The lack of consensus leaves you picturing both possibilities: the terror of hearing poles crack under pressure, and the relief of waking in a structure that held strong through the night. The sensory detail is intense. Inside the lodge, the fire sputters as gusts force smoke downward, filling the air with acrid haze. The hides strain, creaking under the wind's grip, while frost spreads in delicate veins across their seams. Every draft feels like icy fingers creeping along your skin. You pull a fur tighter and hear the whisper of snow filtering in, soft but insistent, a reminder that no wall is ever perfect. Oddly enough, oral traditions speak of children being comforted during such storms by turning the noise into story. The wind was said to be a giant's breath, the snow his footsteps across the world. Parents would murmur these tales to keep fear at bay, transforming chaos into narrative. Imagine falling asleep to such words, the storm outside recast as myth rather than menace. In these moments, survival was collective effort. One person checked the fire, another secured door flaps, another reassured the restless. No one could face a blizzard alone. The storm outside demanded unity inside, binding families closer as they endured. The very act of sleeping became an assertion of trust that others would keep watch, that the lodge would hold, that dawn would come. Researchers highlight how storms tested ingenuity too. If the fire threatened to die, dried dung or stored wood was rationed carefully. If smoke overwhelmed the space, vents were adjusted again and again, even if it meant braving the icy gusts. The storm was not simply endured, it was wrestled with moment by moment until calm returned. Now imagine yourself there, lying under a heavy buffalo hide while the world outside rages. You hear the howl of wind, the groan of poles, the sharp hiss of snow striking hide. Yet inside, the circle of warmth holds. You feel the steady presence of kin beside you, the faint thrum of fire at your feet. Fear lingers, yes, but so does resolve. The storm is vast, but so is the human will to endure. And so, even as blizzards roared across plains and forests, sleep remained possible. Not easy, not undisturbed, but possible. Shelters might bend, fires might sputter, yet the people within found ways to rest. Each storm survived became another story, another memory of endurance passed to the next generation. In this way, even the fiercest winter tempests became woven into the nightly rhythm of survival. The storm has passed, leaving the world outside washed in pale light, snow piled in sculpted drifts like frozen waves. The camp stirs slowly, smoke curling upward once more, and you notice a few figures slipping away from the lodges. They are hunters, wrapped tightly in furs, snowshoes strapped to their feet. Their breath puffs in steady rhythm as they vanish into the silvered forest, heading toward traps set the day before. Winter nights did not end with sleep alone. Often they bled into moonlit wanderings, tasks too important to wait for dawn. It's well documented that many tribes relied on trap lines during winter, checking snares for rabbits, foxes, or other small game. These excursions often happened at night or in the earliest hours, when animals were most active. Hunters moved silently, guided by moonlight reflecting off snow, their senses tuned to every sound. To you, the thought of leaving a warm lodge at midnight may seem unthinkable. To them, it was a necessity, another rhythm of survival woven into sleep. You might be surprised to learn that snow itself provided light enough for travel. On clear nights, the moon and stars reflected so brilliantly off the frozen ground that shadows stretched long and sharp, as though the world were painted in silver. Imagine stepping through that glow, hearing the crunch of snow under your feet, seeing your own shadow glide across the drifts like a silent companion. Scholars still debate how much these nocturnal journeys were purely practical versus spiritual. Some suggest hunters saw them as extensions of daily chores, checking traps to ensure food. Others point to oral traditions describing the night as a liminal time, when spirits walked closer, when guidance might be found in the quiet. Perhaps each step into the snow was both a pursuit of food and a walk through mystery. The sensory experience of such wanderings is unforgettable. The air is sharper, cleaner, carrying scents of pine and frost. The silence is immense, broken only by the snap of a branch or the distant call of an owl. Your breath freezes on your scarf, turning fabric stiff. Snowshoes creak with every step, distributing weight so you float across the drifts rather than sinking. Each motion feels deliberate, each sound magnified in the stillness. Oddly enough, some accounts describe hunters carrying glowing embers in small containers to relight fires at distant shelters. Imagine the glow of a coal cupped in a wooden or clay vessel, casting faint red light across snow. It was not just warmth they carried, but continuity. The fire of one hearth extended into the wilderness. As you picture these journeys, you realize how deeply they shaped the rhythm of rest. Sleep was never absolute. It was broken by duty, by the need to check traps, to ensure that food would be waiting in the morning. Some family members might slumber undisturbed, while others rose in the coldest hours, shouldering responsibility that kept everyone alive. Ethnographers note how these trips blurred the line between waking and dreaming. Hunters often spoke of visions seen in the snow, animals appearing in moonlight, shadows mistaken for spirits. Fatigue mingled with imagination, turning the landscape into a stage where both reality and vision played. When they returned, they brought not only meat or fur, but stories of what they had glimpsed beneath the moon. Now imagine yourself as one of them, leaving the warmth of the lodge to step into icy silence. Your breath crackles, your fingers ache, but your eyes adjust to the brightness of snow. You follow a trail of rabbit prints, check a snare, reset it with practiced care. Above, the stars glitter, indifferent, yet eternal. You feel both small and powerful, part of a cycle older than memory. When you return to the lodge, cheeks burning from cold, you slip back under hides still warm from family breath. The contrast is intoxicating, icy sting fading into enveloping heat, exhaustion settling into your bones as sleep reclaims you. The night has not been wasted. It has been shared between wakefulness and rest, between duty and dream. So these moonlit wanderings became part of the nightly rhythm, binding survival to the silver glow of stars. Sleep was never a wall against the night, but a dance with it, punctuated by footsteps on snow and the quiet satisfaction of returning home again. The hunters return from their moonlit errands, furs heavy with frost, arms burdened with small game. As the lodge stirs, you notice another rhythm that sustains winter life: exchange. It was not enough to hunt or trap alone. Survival depended on trade, on the movement of goods between families and between distant groups. Even in the deepest cold, networks of connection pulsed beneath the snow, ensuring that warmth and food could be shared. Archaeological finds confirm that winter trade routes existed long before European contact. Shells from coastal regions appear hundreds of miles inland. Obsidian from volcanic ranges turns up far across the plains. These items didn't travel by accident. They were carried deliberately, piece by piece, through harsh landscapes. Winter slowed, but did not stop this movement. Camps might huddle against the cold, but exchanges still flickered, like fire passing from one hearth to another. You might be surprised to learn that furs, especially thick winter pelts, were among the most sought-after goods. Buffalo hides, beaver pelts, and fox furs served as both insulation and currency, traded for foods or tools a family lacked. Imagine stepping into a neighboring lodge to offer a surplus hide, returning with dried berries or a polished antler awl. Each transaction was more than practical. It wove bonds of obligation and friendship. Researchers remain divided on how formal these exchanges were. Some argue they followed strict protocols, with rituals of gift-giving and reciprocity marking each trade. Others suggest they were casual, flexible, based on need in the moment. The truth may have varied with tribe, season, and circumstance. What matters is that even during bitter winters, communities refused isolation. They reached outward, ensuring survival was shared. The sensory details bring this to life. Picture hands passing goods across a fire's glow, rough fur brushing against smooth shell, the cold weight of stone tool traded for the warmth of dried meat. Voices murmur thanks, laughter breaks out at a child's interruption, and the air smells of stew simmering as negotiations stretch late into the night. These exchanges were not held in marketplaces but in homes, intimate and communal. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention playful competitions during winter gatherings, where families displayed their best goods to impress visitors. A father might boast about the thickness of his fox pelt, while a neighbor teased him with a rarer shell. These moments of humor broke the monotony of hardship, reminding everyone that winter was not only endured, but enlivened by connection. Imagine lying beneath your furs afterward, knowing that the berries in your belly or the tool by your side came not from your own work alone but from the hands of allies. The warmth you feel is doubled. The fire's heat and the reassurance that others watch over you, even beyond your own lodge. Ethnographers point out that trade also carried intangible gifts. Songs, stories, and rituals traveled with goods, spreading culture as surely as shells or hides. A visitor might teach a new lullaby, which parents then sang to their children as they drifted to sleep. In this way, winter nights became not only about preserving bodies but about enriching minds. Now imagine yourself at such a gathering. A guest enters, snow sliding from their shoulders. You share a bowl of hot broth, listen to their tale of a distant river, and receive in return a necklace of bone beads that will dangle near your child's cradle. When the night deepens, you curl under hides, hearing the faint clink of those beads as your child shifts, and you feel the web of trade binding you to countless others across the frozen land. So, winter trade was more than survival economics. It was an affirmation that even in the harshest season, humans sought connection. The exchange of goods carried the exchange of trust, and when sleep finally came, it was softened by the knowledge that you did not face the cold alone, but as part of a network stretching far beyond your lodge walls. The night lengthens, but within the lodges there is still energy. After trade and food, after songs and stories, families often turn to games, small diversions that brighten the gloom of endless snow. You imagine dice rattling in a wooden bowl, the quiet thrill of guessing outcomes, laughter rising softly even as icy wind gnawed at the world outside. Games may seem trivial in a season of survival, but here they served as warmth of another kind, warmth of spirit. Historical records show that games were not merely for children. Adults played too, often with stakes, shells, beads, or small goods changing hands. Dice games were particularly popular, crafted from plum stones, bone, or carved wood. Painted with simple designs, they clattered together with a satisfying sound, rolling fate across mats of hide. Picture the soft glow of firelight reflecting off dice, shadows stretching as eager hands reached forward to collect winnings. You might be surprised to learn that gambling sometimes continued deep into the night, even when resources were scarce. One family might risk their finest pelt, while another offered strings of beads. The losses could sting, but the excitement brought relief from monotony, and the act of play kept minds sharp. For a moment, survival gave way to suspense, laughter, and rivalry. Scholars continue to debate whether winter games were primarily entertainment or whether they carried ceremonial weight. Some argue dice games symbolized the randomness of fate, connecting players to cycles of chance and destiny. Others suggest they were practical, teaching children counting skills and patience. Both views likely hold truth, intertwining utility and joy. The sensory details of these evenings are lively. The dice click against the bowl, roll across mats, and come to rest with a faint thud. Voices rise and fall in anticipation, then explode in cheer or groan in disappointment. The air is thick with smoke, but laughter cuts through it like clear bells. Dogs shift restlessly, puzzled by the sudden bursts of noise. Oddly enough, not all games required tools. Some were wordplay contests, where one person started a story and others tried to add clever twists. Children played guessing games, trying to identify objects by touch beneath a blanket. Even snow itself became a toy rolled into balls or carved into shapes before the night closed in. These diversions may have been small, but they made long winters bearable. Imagine lying under your hide blanket, half asleep, as the sound of dice rolling and laughter drifts over you. Your body is heavy with warmth, but your mind floats, soothed by the rhythm of play. The game is both background noise and lullaby, reminding you that life continues even in the harshest months. Ethnographers note that these games often ended not with a declared winner, but with a shared meal or a new story, ensuring no one carried bitterness into sleep. The act of playing was more important than the outcome. Community mattered more than victory. And so, as families drifted into slumber, the echoes of games lingered. Children dreamed of lucky rolls and clever guesses, adults of fortunes won or lost. The camp itself felt lighter, its burdens eased by laughter. In that sense, games were as vital as hides or fires. They reminded people that winter was not only endured but enlivened, that survival could include joy. So when you close your eyes now, imagine dice clattering softly in the background, laughter rising in bursts, and warmth radiating not just from fire but from shared amusement. It is a reminder that even in a frozen world, play was never abandoned. It was a thread woven into survival, carrying spirits into dreams steadier and lighter than they might otherwise be. The laughter from the games quiets, replaced by a slower, deeper rhythm. Families begin to settle fully beneath their hides, and the room fills with voices not of play, but of story. You can almost hear the hush spread. As an elder clears their throat, children snuggle closer, and the fire glows steady in anticipation. Tales are about to begin, tales layered thicker than the furs that cover the sleepers, stories that insulate hearts as much as hides insulate bodies. It's well documented that storytelling was central to winter life across countless native communities. Long nights offered hours that could not be spent hunting or traveling, so they were given to words. Elders passed down histories, myths, and lessons, ensuring that each new generation inherited knowledge as naturally as they inherited warmth. For many, the spoken word was as vital to survival as food or fire. One curious tradition was the belief, in some nations, that certain sacred stories could only be told in winter. Coyotes, tricksters, and creation beings made their appearances when the world was frozen and snakes or insects slept beneath the earth. To tell these stories in summer was taboo, believed to upset the balance of nature. Imagine that winter not only shaping bodies, but shaping when memory itself could be spoken. Researchers still disagree about the primary purpose of these tales. Some emphasize their role as moral instruction, children learning humility, courage, or respect through narrative. Others argue that stories were a kind of communal dreaming, weaving entertainment and imagination into long nights. Likely, both were true, and that duality is what gave storytelling its power. The sensory atmosphere of such nights is thick with presence. The fire crackles steadily, throwing shadows that exaggerate every gesture of the speaker's hands. The hides rustle as children shift closer, eyes wide. The air smells of smoke, herbs and stew lingering from earlier. Outside, wind howls, but inside, the only sound that matters is the cadence of the storyteller's voice, low, rising, falling, pausing for effect. Oddly enough, some accounts describe storytellers deliberately lowering their voices as the tale deepened, forcing listeners to lean in. This technique made even the sleepiest child rouse themselves, eager not to miss a word. Picture the whole lodge bending forward, breaths held, waiting for the trickster's next mischief or the hero's next challenge. Imagine yourself under firs, half asleep, hearing a tale of how the stars came to be, perhaps sparks from an ancient fire scattered into the sky. The rhythm of the story seeps into your body, soothing you with familiarity even as your mind wanders through its images. Each word is a thread, stitching the present to the past, the living to the ancestors. Anthropologists note how storytelling built cohesion. Everyone in the lodge shared the same tale, the same laughter, the same gasp of surprise. In a season when survival demanded unity, stories reminded families that they were bound together not just by necessity, but by imagination. They could see themselves in the trickster, the hunter, the star. And so, as the night deepens, you feel the weight of both hides and words pressing gently over you. Stories pile atop each other like layers of fur, each one holding warmth of a different kind. By the time the last tale ends, the lodge is hushed, but the images linger: coyotes dancing in snow, spirits walking through firelight, stars scattered like embers. So sleep comes wrapped not only in furs, but in memory and myth. And when you drift into dreams, it is hard to tell where the story ends and your own vision begins. The line blurs, but that is the point. Stories were not just entertainment, they were blankets of the mind, wrapping families as securely as any buffalo hide. The stories fade into silence, yet not all words are meant to pass so lightly. Some nights are reserved for ceremony, when the lodge transforms from a place of shelter into a sacred space. You can picture it, the fire stirred brighter, herbs tossed into the flames, faces painted with shadows as songs rise that are not casual lullabies but prayers meant to echo beyond the smoke hole. These are sacred ritual nights, where warmth and belief are braided tightly together. Accounts from tribal elders and early observers remind us that winter was a season of ceremony. The long nights were not wasted, they were seen as times when the spirit world came closer, when the veil between human and divine grew thin. Certain dances, chants, or offerings were performed specifically in the heart of winter, when survival itself felt most precarious. To honor the spirits during this time was to ask for protection, guidance, and renewal. You might be surprised to learn that some rituals were explicitly linked to sleep and dreams. A family might sing prayers over their children before bedding down, asking that their dreams carry messages from ancestors. Feathers, stones, or charms were placed near sleepers' heads, not as decoration but as guardians in the unseen world. Imagine lying under firs, feeling the warmth of family, while also believing that invisible protectors hovered near, keeping nightmares at bay. Scholars remain divided about how formal these winter ceremonies were. Some suggest they followed structured patterns, overseen by leaders or shamans, with precise songs and gestures repeated year after year. Others argue they could be more spontaneous prayers, rising in the moment when storms howled or illness threatened. The lack of consensus hints at diversity, rituals shaped by each community's needs, each winter's trials. The sensory world of these nights is unforgettable. Drums might beat softly, their low thump blending with the crackle of fire. Voices chant in unison, weaving a soundscape that feels larger than the lodge itself. The air grows thick with the fragrance of burning cedar or sweetgrass, smoke spiraling upward as if carrying words skyward. Shadows leap wildly on the walls, turning ordinary hides into moving canvases of spirit. Oddly enough, some ceremonies were timed to celestial events. When the moon was full and the snow gleamed brighter, families gathered to honor its power. Stories said the moon guided hunters, watched over children, and listened to prayers whispered before sleep. Imagine drifting into slumber beneath its pale glow, convinced that its silver light followed you even through dreams. Participation was collective. Children might not understand every chant, but they felt the weight of the moment, the hush, the rhythm, the certainty that something larger was unfolding. Adults carried that weight with intention, adding their voices, their breath, their presence. Even the act of staying awake together before surrendering to sleep became sacred, as though the night itself demanded reverence before it would allow rest. Researchers often point out that rituals gave structure to uncertainty. In the chaos of storms, hunger, and fear, ceremonies reminded people that they were not powerless. They had words to speak, fires to light, rhythms to follow. Rituals transformed the cold night into something ordered, meaningful, survivable. Now picture yourself lying back beneath hides after such a night. The chant still hums in your ears, even though the lodge has fallen quiet. The smell of cedar clings to your hair. The drumbeat echoes in your chest. Sleep comes slowly, but when it does, it feels heavy, safe, wrapped not only in warmth but in the certainty of belonging to a world alive with unseen guardians. So, these sacred ritual nights were not interruptions to winter survival, they were its heart. They bound the community together, reassured the fearful, and reminded every sleeper that the world was larger than snow and storms. To close your eyes after such a night was to rest in the knowledge that you were protected, not only by fire and furs, but by spirit itself. The ritual night leaves behind a profound stillness, yet winter has its way of testing the body as well as the spirit. You stir beneath the hides and feel the chill biting at your toes, creeping in no matter how tightly you wrap yourself. Illness is the unspoken guest of every camp, slipping through cracks like icy drafts. Coughs echo faintly in the lodge, bodies huddle closer, and everyone knows that cold and sickness are twin threats. Historical accounts show that native families met these dangers with resourcefulness. Medicinal teas brewed from willow bark, cedar, or spruce needles were sipped beside the fire. Steam inhaled from boiling herbs eased lungs heavy with smoke or frost. Animal fats rubbed on skin sealed in warmth and soothed aches. Sleep was not always peaceful, but healing itself often began in those hours of rest, wrapped in medicine both physical and spiritual. You might be surprised to learn that some believe dreams played a role in recovery. A vision during sleep could reveal which plant to use, or whether the sickness was purely physical or tied to imbalance in the spirit. Shamans, or healers, interpreted these dreams, guiding the family toward remedies. Imagine lying feverish beneath buffalo hides, drifting in and out of visions, while relatives watched anxiously for signs of both change and meaning. Researchers still argue about how widespread these practices were. Some emphasize the empirical knowledge of herbs, vitamin-rich pine needles preventing scurvy, or willow bark acting as a natural pain reliever. Others highlight the ceremonial side, where chants and prayers accompanied every treatment. The debate persists, but perhaps no strict line existed. Medicine and spirit were braided together, inseparable as fur and hide. The sensory details are striking. The bitter taste of bark tea lingers on the tongue, sharp yet strangely comforting. Steam curls from the pot, fogging the cold air. The patient breathes shallowly, wrapped in layer after layer, the fur damp with sweat. A hand strokes their forehead, cool and steady, while the fire pops rhythmically. Around them, the rest of the family drifts into uneasy sleep, ears tuned for changes in breathing. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention children being taught to chew spruce tips in early spring to strengthen their lungs for winters ahead. The practice was preventive, a way of preparing bodies long before illness struck. Survival wasn't only reaction, it was foresight, stretching from one season to the next. Imagine now lying ill, but not alone. Your kin rest nearby, their warmth encircling you like a wall. The healer mutters prayers, tosses cedar onto the fire, and the fragrant smoke swirls above you. The night feels heavy yet also protective. Even in sickness, you are wrapped in community. Sleep comes fitfully, but each doze feels like progress, each dream like guidance. Ethnographers often note how sickness sharpened solidarity. A family might sacrifice their own rest, tending a sick member through the night. They believed healing was a collective effort, no one endured illness in isolation. This constant attention ensured not only survival of the sick, but resilience of the group itself. So when you imagine closing your eyes after sipping a bitter tea, you realize that even in illness, winter sleep was layered with hope. Remedies came not only from plants but from touch, prayer, and the steadfast warmth of others. Illness was a visitor that could not always be banished, but through shared care, it could be endured. And in that endurance, even restless, fevered sleep carried the promise of morning. The harshest storms, the sickness, the hunger, these are heavy to endure. And yet, when you shift in your bedding, you notice something softer, the steady rise and fall of bodies all around you. Winter sleep was never solitary. It was communal, layered with warmth that no single fur or fire could match. You lie shoulder to shoulder with kin, the heat of one body blending into the next until the cold outside feels distant, muffled by the cocoon of togetherness. Anthropologists have long noted the importance of shared sleeping arrangements in native camps. Families gathered close not just for comfort, but for survival. Body heat was a resource as vital as firewood, and no warmth was wasted. Infants nestled between parents, elders tucked near the center, and older children sprawled across edges, every position chosen with care. To sleep was to weave yourself into a living quilt. You might be surprised to learn that even dogs were invited into this circle. Their thick coats radiated heat, and their loyalty added another layer of security. Oral traditions describe children curling against dogs, as though they were additional siblings, both protector and pillow. Imagine the coarse fur tickling your cheek, the dog's steady breathing syncing with your own as sleep pulled you under. Scholars still debate how these arrangements shifted across tribes and regions. Some argue that lodges maintained strict divisions by gender or age, even in sleep. Others point to more flexible arrangements, where survival trumped structure. The diversity leaves a wide picture, but the common thread is clear: the cold was never faced alone. The sensory richness of this communal bed is overwhelming. You feel the press of shoulders, the brush of hair against your skin. The hides grow heavy as more bodies tug them tighter. The air is warm but thick, filled with mingled scents of smoke, sweat, and fur. When someone shifts, the whole bundle moves. When someone sighs, the sound ripples through the group like a wave. Oddly enough, some visitors noted that this closeness led to a kind of synchronized slumber. The breathing of one person set the rhythm, others followed, and soon the entire lodge rose and fell together, a single organism at rest. Picture that, dozens of lungs moving in harmony, as though the family itself were one body dreaming a collective dream. Imagine yourself there now, pressed into the warmth of kin. Your toes brush against someone's legs. Your back rests against a cousin's chest. The fire's glow flickers, but it no longer matters. The warmth here is human, immediate, unyielding. You cannot turn without waking someone, but you don't mind. Safety outweighs space. Comfort outweighs privacy. Ethnographers suggest this communal rest had psychological benefits too. Children grew up knowing their family's presence not only in daylight, but in every breath of the night. Elders found reassurance in the contact of younger kin. Even in dreams, people carried the sense of belonging, a memory of warmth that lingered after waking. So when you think of winter nights in these camps, do not picture solitary sleepers. Picture clusters of warmth, bodies layered like furs, breaths mingling, hearts beating steady. The cold world outside was vast and merciless, but inside, families became each other's blankets, and in that unity, sleep was possible. Communal rest was more than a strategy. It was a philosophy, an understanding that survival itself was shared. No one endured alone. And as the night deepened, that lesson was pressed into every rib and heartbeat, binding people together in warmth that no winter could steal. The lodge has grown so quiet now that even the fire seems reluctant to crackle. Only the faint glow of embers pulses, casting a red heartbeat across the walls. Outside, the snow lies deep, the world wrapped in silence. Inside, Every body is stilled, every breath softened. You can feel the weight of the hides pressing down, the closeness of kin beside you, the faint musk of fur and smoke clinging to the air. It is the deepest hour of night, when exhaustion folds everyone into the gentlest surrender. Archaeological evidence and oral testimony alike remind us that these winter camps endured not by accident, but by the relentless practice of resilience. Each detail you followed: the hides, the snow walls, the lamps, the herbs, the cradle boards, the songs was part of a system honed across centuries. None of it was excess. Every choice had purpose, every ritual carried weight. To sleep here was to rest inside a collective memory of ingenuity. One lesser-known detail is how mourning itself was treated with reverence after such nights. Some traditions speak of a brief silence at dawn, a pause before daily bustle began, to acknowledge that the family had survived another long darkness. Imagine waking with frost on your eyelashes, stirring beside your kin, and realizing that against every odd, the lodge still stood, the fire still smouldered, and your body was still warm. Scholars continue to puzzle over how much of this survival was born from necessity alone and how much was framed as philosophy. Was winter endured merely as an obstacle, or was it embraced as a teacher shaping patience, discipline, and humility? The evidence suggests both. Hardship honed bodies, but it also honed minds, teaching that the cold itself was part of life's balance. The sensory quiet of this final moment is delicate. You hear the occasional sigh as someone shifts, the whisper of snow settling outside, the faint pop of a coal giving way. The air tastes faintly of ash, but not unpleasantly so. It is the taste of continuity, of breath inside walls that have seen countless nights. Your muscles are heavy, your thoughts blurred. Sleep is no longer something sought, but something that claims you gently, like a tide carrying driftwood out to sea. Oddly enough, some oral histories speak of dreams at winter's end, where people envisioned the first shoots of spring before they appeared. These dreams were taken as promises, signs that the long night would not last forever. To dream of green in the white world was to believe in tomorrow, and belief was itself a form of survival. So now, as you close your eyes in this imagined lodge, you are wrapped in every layer that history has offered: buffalo hides, cedar smoke, the songs of elders, the closeness of kin, the watchfulness of firekeepers, and the silence of snow itself. All of it cradles you, not as fragments, but as a whole, a winter world transformed into a sanctuary of sleep. And in that sanctuary, you understand the truth. Native Americans did not simply endure the cold. They turned the very heart of winter into a place where warmth, memory, and meaning intertwined. Sleep was not just rest. It was resilience, ceremony, and belonging. It was the quiet triumph of life carried through the longest night. And now, as we leave the lodge behind, let your own breath slow. Imagine the fire reduced to a bed of glowing coals, faint warmth lingering in the air. Outside, the storm has passed, leaving the world blanketed in white silence. Inside, the people rest in unison, their dreams woven together like threads in a great quilt. Allow yourself to feel that same stillness. Picture the softness of furs against your skin, the gentle hush of snow pressing against walls, the steady rhythm of shared breathing. These details, simple yet profound, remind you that warmth can be found even in the coldest places, and that sleep comes easiest when trust surrounds you. The lessons of those winter nights drift toward you like falling snow. They whisper of patience, of community, of resilience in the face of harshness. They remind you that survival is not only about strength, but about softness, sharing warmth, telling stories, tending fires, and dreaming together. Even in the darkest hours, comfort is possible. Let those whispers guide you now. Let them soften your own edges. Each inhale carries warmth, each exhale releases weight. There is no need to hold yourself tightly anymore. The night will keep itself. The fire will endure without your watch. Slowly, gently, Let the images of snow and fire fade into your own darkness. Feel yourself carried into a cocoon of safety, as if the hides have been tucked tighter around your shoulders. The cold is far away now, unable to reach you. Only warmth remains, steady and calm. So drift, as the camp drifts, into rest. Let the night hold you as it held them, carrying you toward morning with quiet strength. Sleep well, dream gently. You are safe.